Hello, my friend, and welcome back to another quiet journey into the soft glow of history and legend. Tonight, as you settle into rest, we will drift together into a time wrapped in mist, memory, and myth. A time before kings wore crowns of gold, before chivalry had a name, before Camelot raised its shining walls toward the morning sun. A time when the island of Britain lay wounded, tired, and waiting for a king it had not yet imagined, waiting for a story that would one day echo through centuries. Before we speak of Arthur, we must speak first of the world that needed him, a world dimmed by the fading light of an empire, and trembling beneath the weight of its own uncertainty. So close your eyes if you wish, and let your breath fall into an easy rhythm. The story will carry you, the story will hold you, and somewhere, between waking and sleep, you may feel the quiet heartbeat of a land that once prayed for a savior. Let us begin. Long before the shining banners of Camelot ever fluttered in the wind, Britain was a land standing at the edge of twilight. For nearly 400 years, the Romans had ruled these green hills, carving roads through forests, raising walls against the wild north, and building towns where markets hummed with languages from across their vast empire. But nothing made by human hands lasts forever. Empires age, just as people do. Stone cracks, roads crumble, light dims. And the great Roman Empire, stretched too far and growing weary, slowly withdrew its grasp from the misty island at its fringe. The legions marched away, their crimson cloaks fading into the distance, leaving Britain behind with a silence that felt heavy and unreal. The people watched them go, with eyes full of fear and longing. Half of them wanted the Romans to stay. Half of them were relieved to see them leave. But none of them, not even the wisest among them, understood what would come next. When the last legion's footsteps faded, Britain found itself standing alone in a vast and trembling darkness. Without the structure Rome imposed, old rivalries resurfaced. Neighbors who had once traded now mistrusted each other. Tribes that had once been united under the eagle banner splintered into small, desperate kingdoms, each ruled by men uncertain of their own power. The land felt fractured, like a mirror struck by an unseen hand, cracks forming, edges separating, pieces drifting apart. And in the shadow left by Rome, new dangers crept in. Across the cold eastern sea came the Saxons. Their long ships cut through the waves like knives, carrying warriors with pale eyes and hungry ambitions. They came as raiders at first, then as conquerors, and finally as settlers who believed that this abandoned island might someday belong to them. Villages burned. Families fled west toward the forests and mountains. The sound of strange tongues filled the air, harsh and unfamiliar to British ears. Fear became a constant companion. But the Saxons were not Britain's only trouble. In the west, the old Celtic tribes guarded their valleys fiercely. In the north, Pictish warriors painted their bodies with blue woad and moved like shadows among the heather. To the south, petty kings argued over borders, titles, and ancient claims that no one fully remembered. It seemed that every man wanted to be a king, and so the island that once held one empire now held a dozen quarrelsome warlords, all convinced they were destined for greatness. Yet none of them was strong enough to hold the land together. None could silence the fears of their people. None could push back the darkness closing in from every side. But history has a way of gathering itself around a single point, a single turning, a single breath before change. And in this trembling moment between eras, Britain stood waiting for a king, waiting for hope, waiting for a story powerful enough to bind its broken pieces together again. Yet hope, my friend, rarely arrives with fanfare. It comes quietly, softly, like the first light of dawn brushing against a cold horizon. And before the hope of Arthur entered the world, Whispers of his coming drifted through the land. In old hilltop circles where stones cast ancient shadows, druids murmured of visions. In lonely monasteries where monks bent over fragile manuscripts, prophecies flickered like candle flames. And in the small cottages of shepherds and farmers, dreams carried strange symbols: a sword burning with starlight, a crown resting on water, a child whose destiny shone brighter than the world could understand. Some claimed these were only stories to comfort a frightened people. Others believed they were warnings, but a few, a very small few, understood they were promises. Among these few was a man whose name would one day become inseparable from legend, a man who walked between the natural and the supernatural with the ease of someone born of both. His name was Merlin, not quite wizard, not quite prophet, not quite mortal in the way most men understood the word. He was something in between, something older, something deeper. Merlin saw the shape of the future the way others saw the shape of clouds, not in clear pictures, but in shifting truths, glimpses of what might be. He saw destruction gathering on the horizon like a dark storm. He saw kings rising only to fall in blood. He saw Britain, broken and bleeding, sliding toward a night from which it might never return. And in the heart of all these visions, he saw one shining thread of hope, a child, not yet born, not yet named, but destined to change everything. And so, Merlin began to prepare, not with armies, not with weapons, but with patience, with silence, with a plan that would take years to unfold. He watched the land, he watched the kings, he listened to the wind, and he waited. Meanwhile, far from prophecy and politics, life continued in quiet villages scattered across hills and forests. Children laughed in fields. Mothers baked bread from grain they hoped would last the winter. Old men told stories of the Romans walking these very paths long ago, though each year fewer remembered what Rome had truly been. But even in these peaceful moments, something felt off. The air carried tension. Animals grew restless at night. Birds fled inland before storms that had not yet formed. Something in the land itself seemed to know that change was coming. Something whispered of destiny. And in this land of fear, hope, and quiet anticipation, people clung desperately to stories. Stories of heroes who would rise in times of need. Stories of kings who would bring justice. Stories of a once and future king who would return from the shadows when the world cried out for him. Many did not believe these tales, but they repeated them anyway. Sometimes a story survives not because it is true, but because people need it to be true. Winter after winter passed. The land dimmed, but the whispers grew brighter. It was said that beneath a certain hill, the earth glowed faintly as if guarding a secret. It was said that in a deep forest, a stag with white antlers watched travelers with almost human intelligence. It was said that children born under strange stars grew up with strange gifts. The world felt alive with signs, as if Britain itself sensed that a new chapter was about to begin. Tonight, as you rest, imagine that world. Imagine the cold mist weaving through the trees. Imagine a land that feels ancient and young at the same time. Imagine a silence so deep you can hear the echo of your own heartbeat. And within that silence, imagine a question the land itself seems to ask. Who will guide us? Who will protect us? Who will lead us into the dawn? And now, my friend, imagine the moment just before a story begins. That soft pause, that breath the world takes in, that fragile expectation of something extraordinary. This is where our tale truly begins. Not with a king, not with a crown, but with a land longing for hope, and with the first faint flicker of destiny forming on the edge of a cold winter night. Soon, a child will be born. A child whose name will travel across centuries. A child who will lift a sword no other hand can move. A child who will build a kingdom from the ruins of a broken world. But for now, he is only a promise, a whisper, a light hidden in the dark. And as the night deepens around the waiting island, the wind carries a gentle truth across hills and rivers. The king is coming, even if no one yet knows his name. You remember, my friend, how chapter 1 ended in a quiet breath, the land waiting, trembling, listening for a king who had not yet arrived. And in that breath, in that stillness, a single figure walked between shadow and starlight. A figure older than the kings of Britain, older even than the stories whispered about him. A figure whose presence marked the boundary where the natural and the supernatural intertwined. His name was Merlin, and to understand Arthur, we must understand the one who shaped his destiny long before he drew breath. Merlin's origins were not like the origins of ordinary men. Some say he was born of a mortal woman and a spirit not bound to flesh. Some say he was shaped from the breath of ancient forests and the wisdom of forgotten gods. Others whisper that he was the last child of an age fading from the world. An age when magic was not myth but memory. Whatever truth lies beneath these stories, one thing is certain. Merlin walked this world with knowledge far beyond the reach of kings or warriors. He carried an awareness that stretched backward into the deepest old times and forward into futures not yet written. He was a bridge between eras, a guardian of something older than kingdoms, a watcher of the fragile threads that bind destiny. In those days after Rome's retreat, when the land grew colder and lonelier, Merlin traveled Britain like a wandering shadow. He crossed wild moors where the wind sang through ancient stones. He walked silent forests where the trees leaned inward as if listening to him. He rested beside rivers that had seen empires rise and fall. Nature itself knew him. Birds quieted when he passed. Wolves approached him without fear. Even the restless mists of the island parted at his arrival, as though recognizing an old friend. But Merlin's wandering was not without purpose. With each step, he read the land as one might read a book. He watched the skies for patterns few could understand. He listened to the tremors of the earth for warnings of change. And slowly, painfully, a truth began to reveal itself to him. Britain was dying, not in the way forests die in winter, only to bloom again in spring, but in a deeper, more tragic way. The kind of death that comes when hope breaks. The kind that comes when a people forget their unity, their shared purpose, their roots. Merlin saw the petty kings who fought as much for pride as for survival. He saw villages torn apart by raids that seemed endless. He saw children growing up with fear as their earliest memory. And he saw the darkness gathering far across the sea. A darkness carried on longships with carved dragon heads that cut through the waves. That darkness would grow. That darkness would consume. Unless Britain found something stronger than fear to unite it, Merlin knew that such strength would not come from armies or iron blades. It would come from a single heart, one steady light in the storm. He spent years searching for signs. He consulted monks who kept ancient scrolls. He shared fires with hermits who claimed to dream in the language of angels. He slept beneath standing stones older than memory, letting visions seep into him through the cold earth. More than once, he glimpsed what felt like the outline of a future king, a boy with a noble heart, growing in secret, rising in humility. But the boy had no face, no name, only a presence, faint as moonlight reflected on water. Still, Merlin trusted the pattern. He trusted the quiet way destiny gathered around certain souls even before they entered the world. And he trusted the land itself, for Britain would always send a sign when it was ready. One night, in the depths of winter, that sign came. Merlin was walking in a valley hidden between two ancient hills. Snow lay thick on the ground, untouched and undisturbed, like a clean page waiting for a story. And there, In the heart of that stillness, he heard something. Not a voice, not a sound, but a pull, a call, a whisper that seemed to come from the sky and the earth at the same time. He followed it, knowing without knowing why. The sky above him shifted into a rare alignment, stars wheeling like celestial guardians taking their appointed places. Merlin felt something stir inside him, an old magic, an older knowing. It told him that a child would be born that night, a child who would shape the fate of the island, a child whose arrival would echo through centuries. He wrapped himself in his cloak and walked toward the village the stars pointed to, a quiet place, unremarkable to anyone but destiny. Snow fell gently, cushioning his footsteps. Even the wind softened its voice, as though not to disturb what was coming. When Merlin arrived, the midwives were already preparing. The air glowed faintly with the warmth of a fire inside a small cottage. From within came the muffled sound of a woman in labor, breath strained, heart fierce, life pushing its way into the world. Merlin stood just outside the light, watching, not wanting to intrude on the sacred moment. But he knew this was the child. This was the face destiny had hidden from him until now. And when the infant's first cry pierced the cold night, something extraordinary happened. The ancient oak outside the cottage, bare, frozen, lifeless, blossomed. In the heart of winter, with flowers white as snow and fragrant as spring rain, nature itself had bowed in welcome. Merlin closed his eyes and breathed in that impossible scent. He felt its meaning settle in his bones. This child was not ordinary. This child belonged to the land, to the future, to a story larger than life. But fate, as always, demanded sacrifice, for with this birth came danger. There were those who would see the child as a threat, others who would twist him for their own ambition. Kings who feared losing their power, enemies who feared the prophecy whispered of a unifier. If the child stayed in this village, he would not survive. Not for long. So Merlin intervened, not through force, not through fear, but through quiet persuasion, speaking softly to the local lord, urging him to protect the infant by giving him up. It was a terrible request, a heartbreaking one. But the Lord agreed, for he felt something in the air that told him this child did not belong to any one man. He belonged to the whole land. And so, under cover of night, the child was taken away, wrapped carefully in a warm cloth, carried through drifting snow, delivered into Merlin's waiting arms. The wizard held the infant close, feeling the small heartbeat against his chest, a fragile rhythm, but behind it lay a strength he had never sensed before. He whispered a blessing in a tongue older than Latin, older than Celtic, older than any language spoken by men. The child settled instantly, as though recognizing the sound, and in that moment, Merlin knew the truth without doubt. This was the child from his visions. This was the child whose soul shone in the dark future he had foreseen. This was the child destined to become Arthur. But destiny, Merlin understood, was not a straight line. It was a tangled path, easily lost, easily broken. So he made a decision that would shape history. Arthur would not grow among kings or warriors. He would not be raised in luxury or arrogance. He would not be fed the pride that destroyed so many rulers. Instead, he would grow in a hidden valley where wisdom was nurtured like a living flame. A place where old knowledge had been kept safe while the world above fractured. A place where Merlin could shape the boy slowly, gently, without the burden of a crown pressing on his childhood. The hidden valley was unlike any place in Britain. Mists protected it like a soft curtain, opening only for those who knew its secret paths. Streams ran clear and cold, singing in voices that seemed older than time. Trees swayed in patterns that felt intentional, as though conversing silently with the wind. And in that valley lived a community of wise men and women healers, monks, druids, teachers, each carrying a piece of ancient knowledge. Merlin entrusted Arthur to them, not to one guardian, but to many. For a king, he believed, must learn from many sources. He must understand the world from more than one angle. He must be shaped by wisdom, not by power. In this sanctuary, Arthur grew. Merlin visited often, sometimes openly, sometimes as a shadow on the ridge. He watched the boy learn to speak, to walk, to think, to question. He watched him show compassion to injured animals, fairness in childish disputes, curiosity about every mystery he encountered. But most importantly, Merlin watched him grow without fear. Fear, he believed, was the seed of tyranny. A king who feared the world would try to control it. A king who feared weakness would hide behind cruelty. Arthur, raised among love and gentle discipline, grew without those shadows. He became a boy with quiet strength, not loud ambition. And that was exactly what Britain needed. For Merlin had seen the future, a future where the land fractured further, torn apart by greed, vengeance, and despair. He had seen leaders rise with violence, only to fall with greater violence. He had seen the Saxons gaining ground year after year. He had seen dark storms gathering beyond the shores, storms no army could stop. But amid all that destruction, there was one vision that shone like a beacon, a king wearing both humility and courage, a king who carried a sword not for conquest but for unity, a king who would build a fellowship bound by honor instead of blood. Merlin had seen Arthur, not as a savior of magic, not as a conqueror, but as a healer of fractures, a mender of broken things, a light where the world grew dark. And that, my friend, is why Merlin chose him, not for his birthright, not for prophecy alone, but because he sensed in Arthur a rare and precious truth. The boy would become the kind of king who listened before he commanded. The kind of king who understood strength was not the ability to dominate others, but the ability to lift them up. The kind of king who would carry the weight of a nation without letting it harden his heart. As Arthur grew older, Merlin knew the time would come when the hidden valley could no longer shelter him. The land outside was growing restless, wars brewed, enemies massed, and the vacant throne of Britain waited. Merlin's task was nearly complete. But one final test remained, a test not of strength, but of destiny. A sword buried in stone, a challenge for the world to witness, a silent question to which only Arthur's touch would be the answer. But that moment, my friend, belongs to another chapter. For now, let us rest with the image of Merlin standing at the edge of the hidden valley, watching a boy who would one day change the fate of an island, a boy who laughed without knowing the burden of kingship, a boy who listened to the wind as though it whispered secrets meant only for him, a boy who had been chosen long before his name was ever spoken, the boy who would become Arthur. And somewhere in the mists, the land listened, and waited, and hoped. The night Arthur entered the world was not a night of gentle moonlight or quiet skies. It was a night when the heavens themselves seemed restless, as if preparing for something they had long awaited. A night when the boundaries between worlds thinned to a whisper. A night woven from storm and prophecy. A night meant for the birth of a king. In the hidden valleys and hilltop villages of Britain, people had grown used to strange omens. They had lived too long in uncertainty not to notice when the air changed. But even the oldest shepherds, the wisest monks, and the most seasoned druids felt something different as that night descended. The wind rose with a howl that echoed like ancient voices calling across the ages. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed, swirling in patterns no ordinary storm would make. The air seemed charged, heavy, alive with anticipation. Some said the storm came from the sea, rolling in on dark waves like a great creature awakening from centuries of sleep. Others claimed it began in the forests, summoned by old magic stirring in the roots of ancient trees. But Merlin, who stood alone on a cliff overlooking the valley, knew the truth. The storm did not come from earth or sea or sky. It came from destiny itself, a bending of the world, a reminder that some births are too important to go unnoticed. Lightning tore through the clouds in bright, branching veins. Thunder rolled not once, but again and again, like drums announcing the arrival of a long-awaited sovereign. Rain fell in fierce sheets that turned the hills silver, then softened suddenly, as if the storm remembered the delicate moment approaching and bowed its head in respect. In a small settlement nestled at the foot of two great hills, a single cottage glowed with warm firelight. Inside, a woman labored, breath ragged, eyes determined, body trembling under the weight of bringing new life into the world. Her name was Igraine, and though she did not yet know the full truth, she sensed that the child she carried was unlike any child before him. She felt it in the way her heartbeat shifted when she sensed the storm. She felt it in the warmth that surrounded her even as the wind outside screamed. She felt it in the strange calm that settled over her despite the pain. Some births are ordinary. Some births echo in silence. But this one shook the very fabric of reality. Even as the world pretended to sleep, the midwives attending her moved quickly and skillfully. They whispered prayers under their breath, not to one god, but to any that might be listening. For they too sensed the strangeness of the night. Their hands trembled as they prepared cloths and water. Their eyes flicked to the windows whenever lightning flashed. Something was coming. Something greater than any of them could understand. Outside, the earth seemed to breathe. The wind sang through the trees in harmonies older than human memory. Animals huddled close to their shelters, sensing forces beyond natural weather. Even the river nearby slowed its rush, its surface trembling as though reflecting not water, but destiny. At the moment when Igraine's final cry filled the small cottage, the storm paused. The rain ceased mid-drop. The thunder stilled. The lightning froze like white fire etched across the sky. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. And with that held breath, Arthur came into the world. A small, warm, human child, fragile in appearance, yet carrying within him a spark that could not be contained by ordinary life. As he took his first breath, something extraordinary happened. The lightning that had stalled across the sky suddenly shattered into 1,000 shimmering fragments. The storm broke open like a great curtain drawn aside, and for a moment only, a moment, the night sky above the cottage was filled with two worlds overlaying one another. The mortal world of Britain, dark and rain-soaked, and another world older, brighter, hidden beneath the surface of the ordinary. A world of shimmering shapes. A world where light moved like living water. A world where figures made of mist and starlight watched from the veil. Some called it the other world. Some called it Avalon. Some believed it was simply the soul of the land made visible. But whatever it was, it welcomed the newborn with a soft glow, like dawn rising behind the storm. Igraine held her son close, unaware of the cosmic shift around her, but the midwives felt it. One gasped and dropped the cloth she held. Another crossed herself instinctively. The oldest among them bowed her head, whispering a prayer in a tongue forgotten by most, for she knew a child born in such a moment was touched by both worlds, born of flesh, yes, but carrying the whisper of another realm in his blood. As the brief vision faded and the storm resumed its course, Merlin arrived, not walking, but appearing from the mist as though the night itself had carried him forward. He looked older than the hills, and younger than the storm in the same breath. His cloak clung to him, soaked by the rain, yet he seemed unaffected by the cold. His eyes held a depth that spoke of knowledge no mortal man should possess. He stood before the cottage door and breathed deeply. The scent of wet earth, the faint trace of wood smoke, the lingering pulse of magic. He knew the child had been born, and he knew the world had shifted because of it. Inside the cottage, the midwives turned as the door opened without a knock. Wind swirled in, carrying the remnants of the storm. Then Merlin stepped into the glow of the firelight. The oldest midwife recognized him first. She lowered her head with a mixture of respect and fear, for Merlin did not appear at births unless something great or terrible was beginning. Igraine looked up at the stranger entering her home. Her face glistened with sweat and tears, but her eyes were calm, as though some part of her had expected him. Merlin approached her slowly. He did not speak at first. He simply knelt, studying the child in her arms with a reverence that seemed impossible for a man so mysterious and powerful. Arthur's tiny hands flexed toward him. His eyes, still unfocused, drifted over Merlin's face, and for a moment, just a fleeting moment, the wizard felt as though the child recognized him, as though the child knew him, as though fate itself nodded in acknowledgement. "He is the one," Merlin whispered. No one else understood the full meaning of the words. Not Igraine, not the midwives, not the wind outside or the fire crackling in the hearth, but the world did. Somehow, the world seemed to lean closer, as if eager to hear what would happen next. Igraine's voice, soft and uncertain, broke the silence. "Who is he?" she whispered. Merlin looked at her with gentle sadness. "He is the future," he replied. "He is the hope that Britain has long forgotten." Igraine shivered, not from cold, but from something deep in her spirit. She gazed down at her son, realizing that her life and his would never be ordinary. Merlin stayed only long enough to ensure both mother and child were safe. Then, when the midwives tended to Igraine, he stepped outside into the storm again. The night greeted him with wild wind and sheets of rain. But beneath that chaos, he felt something deeper. The land itself seemed to hum, a soundless vibration, a recognition. The child had been born, the child had been accepted, but Merlin also knew danger would not wait. Word of the birth would travel faster than any messenger, faster even than rumor. Prophecy has a way of finding ears eager to twist it. There were those who would fear the child, those who would seek to claim him, those who would want him dead. For a land divided produces hearts divided, and in such darkness, even the promise of a king can inspire hatred. Merlin returned to the cottage just before dawn. The storm had begun to break. Soft pink light filtered through the clouds. Birdsong hesitantly returned to the quiet valley. Igraine looked exhausted, but peaceful. She held Arthur close, unwilling to let him go. Merlin approached her gently. "There is no time," he said quietly. "He must be taken, tonight. If he stays, he will not survive." Igraine's heart clenched. She knew this moment would come, though she did not understand why. Tears welled in her eyes. She kissed her son's forehead again and again. She whispered a mother's blessing, soft and desperate, and finally, with trembling hands, she placed the child in Merlin's arms. The wizard held Arthur with surprising tenderness. He wrapped the infant in a cloak lined with warm wool. He touched the child's cheek with the back of his hand. "Forgive me," Merlin whispered, "for everything that will follow." The midwives watched in silence. The oldest stepped forward and placed a hand on Merlin's arm. "Walk with care," she murmured. "The world is watching." Merlin nodded. "I know." He stepped out into the morning light. The storm clouds fled across the sky, leaving the world washed clean. The earth smelled fresh and new, as though it too had been reborn. Merlin walked down the hill with Arthur cradled against his chest. Each step felt both heavy and light, as though he carried not a child, but the dream of a nation. The path wound through tall grasses still bent beneath the weight of the storm. Dew sparkled like shards of broken starlight. A nearby brook murmured softly, as though offering a lullaby. Merlin walked toward the hidden valley, the sanctuary where Arthur would grow in safety, a place protected by old magic and older silence. As he neared the boundary of that sacred land, the mist parted gracefully, welcoming him. Light filtered through the veil in soft gold hues, warming the air. It felt like stepping from the mortal world into something sacred, something untouched, something eternal. The guardians of the valley emerged to greet him, wise women, druids, scholars, warriors who had set aside their swords, people who had chosen knowledge over power, peace over conflict. They approached Merlin and looked down at the sleeping child in his arms. None spoke, but each felt the gravity of the moment. The valley had waited long for this child, for this future king. Merlin passed Arthur into their care. The child stirred slightly, then settled again, as though he felt at home. The guardians exchanged glances, a mix of awe, curiosity, and a hint of fear. For even they, with all their wisdom, knew that raising a child of prophecy was no simple task. Merlin remained only a moment longer. He watched as the guardians carried Arthur toward the heart of the valley. He watched as the mists closed behind them, sealing the sanctuary, and he whispered softly, "Grow well, little one, for one day the weight of the world will rest upon your shoulders." As Merlin turned away, the sun rose over the eastern hills. Its light spilled across Britain, illuminating fields, forests, rivers, and ruins. A new day had begun. A new era had opened. Somewhere in the hidden valley, the child destined to become Arthur slept peacefully, unaware of the fate awaiting him. And far away, across the troubled land, the world shifted subtly toward its future. Storms had passed, but greater storms would come. Kings would rise and fall, battles would scar the earth. Hope would fade and be reborn again. But through it all, the promise of that storm-painted night would endure. The child between two worlds had arrived, and with him, a story that would echo for 1,000 years. Dawn came softly to the hidden valley on the morning after Arthur's birth, brushing the mist with strokes of pale gold. The storm that had heralded his arrival was now only a memory, leaving the world silent and freshly washed, as though nature itself were sighing in relief. And deep within that sanctuary, shielded by hills older than memory and mists older than language, the child destined to be king slept in peaceful innocence. He knew nothing of prophecy, nothing of kingdoms torn by conflict, nothing of the great weight that would one day rest upon his shoulders. He knew only warmth. He knew only the gentle arms that cradled him. He knew only the quiet hum of a land that had waited patiently for him to arrive. As the sun rose higher, Merlin watched from a distance, standing on a ridge overlooking the valley. He had brought Arthur here in the final moments of Chapter 3, but now, as Chapter 4 begins, he allowed himself the first breath of true relief. The child was safe, hidden, protected by forces neither enemy nor fate could easily find. For the valley was more than geography. It was a seam between worlds, a place where ordinary time softened and stretched, where the old magic clung like dew on leaves. It was the only place in Britain where a child of prophecy could grow without fear. And Merlin, with the weight of centuries in his gaze, knew that Arthur's childhood must be shaped with care, every day a lesson, every breath a foundation, every moment a quiet preparation for the destiny waiting just beyond the horizon. Arthur's earliest years passed in gentle rhythms. He was raised not by a single guardian, but by a community woven together like threads in a tapestry. Druids, healers, monks, former warriors, teachers, storytellers each played a role, each offering a piece of the wisdom he would one day need. No crown touched his head. No royal title was spoken. He was simply Arthur, A boy with bright eyes and an instinctive kindness that made even the birds seem to linger near him. A boy who grew as trees grow, reaching toward light without knowing why. From the beginning, the valley shaped him. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of pine, moss, and distant rain. The streams cut through the valley floor like silver threads, clear enough to drink from without hesitation. Every morning, Arthur woke to birdsong echoing off the surrounding cliffs. Every night, he fell asleep under a sky so full of stars it seemed the heavens themselves were leaning close to watch him dream. And always, the valley spoke to him, not with words, but with gentle impressions. A certain warmth in the sunlight, a soft pull towards stillness when he grew restless, a whisper of intuition steering him away from fear. The land itself seemed to guide him, shaping him with a tenderness the outside world had long forgotten. His earliest lessons were simple ones. He learned to walk on uneven ground without stumbling. He learned to feel the difference between a welcoming breeze and a warning wind. He learned to listen, truly listen to the rustling of leaves, the murmur of water, the hum of insects. For the valley's guardians believed that listening was the first form of wisdom. To hear the world, they told him, you must first be still. And though he did not yet understand the meaning, Arthur absorbed the lesson through experience rather than explanation. When he was old enough to speak, his teachers began weaving deeper lessons into his days. A monk taught him language, the old speech of the Britons, the Latin of the former Romans, and the symbolic scripts carved into ancient stones. A druid showed him how shadows move with the sun, teaching him the rhythm of time and the cycles of the seasons. A healer taught him plants, those that soothe, those that nourish, those that can take life if misused. Arthur listened to each lesson with a focus unusual in a child. He asked questions with an earnest curiosity, never from pride, always from wonder. It became clear early on that he saw the world differently, not as separate pieces, but as a connected whole. He understood relationships between people, between creatures, between forces, long before he could fully articulate them. And it was this understanding, this natural inclination toward unity, that confirmed Merlin's belief that the boy was truly the one Britain had waited for. Merlin visited often during these early years, though he rarely interfered with the day-to-day teaching. He preferred to observe, slipping through the trees like a shadow and watching how Arthur interacted with the world. Sometimes Arthur would sense him and run to him, his small feet pattering across the forest floor. Sometimes he would offer Merlin a leaf, a pebble, or a flower, gifts of pure innocence. Merlin always accepted them with solemn gratitude, for in these small gestures he saw glimpses of the man Arthur would become, a man who ruled not through fear, but through connection. The first time Merlin began instructing Arthur directly, the boy was about 5 years old. They sat together beside a stream, the water reflecting the morning light like tiny stars. Merlin pointed to the flowing water. "What do you see?" he asked. Arthur thought for a moment. "Water," he answered. "Yes," Merlin said softly, "but water is more than water." Arthur tilted his head, waiting. "It is soft," Merlin continued. "It bends, it yields to every obstacle." And yet, he picked up a stone and dropped it into the stream. The water parted easily around it. And yet, in time, this soft water will carve through mountains. Arthur's eyes widened. "How?" "Because softness," Merlin said, "is strength misunderstood." It was the beginning of a lesson Merlin would return to again and again, the lesson that softness is stronger than hardness. Not because softness wins by force, but because softness wins by endurance, by patience, by quiet persistence. Merlin believed that Arthur, more than any king before him, would need this lesson. For Britain's future would not be shaped by brute power. It would be shaped by compassion, unity, and understanding. Hardness might win a battle, but softness would win a kingdom. Other lessons followed. One afternoon, the Valley Guardians brought Arthur to an ancient oak. Its trunk was gnarled with age, its branches reaching outward like the arms of a giant. "Touch the bark," they told him. Arthur placed his small hand against the rough wood. "Feel it breathe," the druid whispered. Arthur listened, and for the first time sensed the slow, steady pulse of life within the tree, a rhythm older than his own, older than kingdoms, older even than Merlin. "What does it teach you?" the druid asked. Arthur hesitated, searching for words. "It's strong," he said. "Yes," the druid replied, "but not because it fights the wind. It is strong because it bends with it." And again, the same principle emerged: strength through softness, flexibility over rigidity, grace over force. As Arthur grew older, his lessons grew more intricate. He learned the names of stars and their movements across the night sky. He learned the stories of ancient kings and the mistakes that had doomed them. He learned the power of words, the danger of anger, and the quiet dignity of humility. Each lesson was delivered gently, patiently, like drops of water shaping stone. And though Arthur did not yet realize it, these lessons were building within him a philosophy of leadership that would someday set him apart from every warlord in Britain. There were physical lessons, too. When Arthur reached the age of 7, a warrior living in the valley, an elderly man named Bran, began teaching him the basics of combat, not with swords at first, but with balance and awareness. Before Arthur was allowed to hold a wooden practice blade, he spent months learning how to fall without injury, how to move his feet over uneven ground without stumbling, how to sense an opponent's intention through subtle shifts in weight. Only when he had mastered these fundamentals did Bran place a wooden sword in his hand. Even then, Arthur was taught not to strike, but to observe, to understand the movement of bodies, to predict actions before they occurred, to respond without aggression. Bran's philosophy was simple. A true warrior does not seek battle. A true warrior ends it. Arthur absorbed these lessons deeply. Bran sometimes watched the boy practicing alone and felt a quiet awe. Arthur moved with a natural grace, a harmony with his environment that no amount of training could have manufactured. It was as though the valley itself flowed through him. And Bran, who had seen many fighters in his lifetime, whispered to the others, "This boy will be a warrior unlike any other." But the valley's guardians were careful. They wanted Arthur to understand violence without becoming consumed by it. They wanted him to be fearless, not fierce, to be capable of defense without craving dominance, for they knew the outside world would one day demand strength of him, but they hoped he would wield that strength gently. As Arthur approached the age of 9, Merlin's role in his education deepened. The wizard began teaching him lessons too subtle for the other guardians to impart. Lessons about balance between light and dark, between power and restraint, between destiny and free will. They walked together at dawn, when the valley glowed with soft light spilling over the hills. Merlin spoke not as a teacher lecturing a student, but as a guide offering reflections. "You must learn to see the world as it is," he told Arthur, "but also as it could be." Arthur listened, though he did not fully understand. Merlin smiled kindly. "You will," he promised. In time, Merlin taught Arthur to quiet his mind until he could sense the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet. He taught him to breathe deeply before speaking, so that his words would be clear, calm, and intentional. He taught him that a leader's power came not from commanding others, but from understanding them. And always, he returned to the same lesson: softness over hardness. "Hardness breaks," Merlin said one evening as they sat beneath the stars. "It stands firm until it shatters. But softness endures. It adapts. It finds a way." Arthur nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand. As the years passed, the valley seemed to shape itself around Arthur's growth. When he needed solitude, The woods opened paths that led him to quiet places. When he sought companionship, the guardians appeared with gentle smiles. When he felt restless, the wind carried scents of distant lands he had yet to see. And when he felt doubt, a rare but meaningful occurrence, the valley held him in its stillness until the uncertainty passed. By the age of 12, Arthur had become a boy both gentle and strong, curious yet steady, humble yet undeniably destined for something greater. He did not know who he truly was. The guardians told him only that he was special, that his path would one day extend far beyond the valley. But even without knowing his identity, Arthur sensed that he was being prepared for a world heavier, harsher, more chaotic than the sanctuary he called home. Sometimes he dreamed of vast landscapes, burning fields, stormy coastlines, kings clashing on battlefields. Sometimes he felt a pull in his chest, like a thread connecting him to something far away. At these times, he would seek out Merlin. The wizard always seemed to know when Arthur needed him. He would appear with a calm presence, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "What troubles you?" he would ask. Arthur often struggled to articulate the feeling. "I feel called," he would say eventually. Merlin nodded with understanding. "You will answer that call," he said softly. But not yet. There came a day, however, Arthur's 13th birthday, when Merlin decided the time had come for a conversation they had long avoided. The two walked along the ridge overlooking the valley, where the sky stretched endlessly above them. The wind carried the scent of distant rain. "Arthur," Merlin said, his voice low and steady, "you have grown well." Arthur looked down modestly. Merlin smiled faintly. "There is no shame in acknowledging your own growth. Humility does not mean blindness." Arthur waited, sensing something important was coming. Merlin continued, "You have been raised here for a reason. You were hidden for a reason. And soon, you will need to leave this place." Arthur felt his heart tighten. "Leave?" "Yes," Merlin said gently. "The world beyond the valley is in need. Britain is breaking. Its people are lost. Its leaders are unwise. And you—" He placed both hands on Arthur's shoulders, looking into the boy's clear, steady eyes. "You are meant to help heal it." Arthur did not understand everything, but he understood enough. He understood that his childhood was ending, that the valley had not been his home, but his refuge. A place to grow in peace before stepping into chaos. Fear flickered briefly across his features. Merlin saw it, and his expression softened. "That fear," he said softly, "is not a weakness. It is a reminder that you care." He rested a hand over Arthur's heart. "As long as this remains soft, you will never become hard in the wrong way." Arthur took a deep breath. "What must I do?" Merlin smiled with quiet pride. "First, you must learn who you truly are. But that, dear listener, belongs to the next chapter. For now, let us remain here in the hidden valley, watching the boy who would be king take his final steps of childhood. Let us watch him breathe deeply of the soft wind. Let us watch him listen to the quiet wisdom of the land. Let us watch him carry within him the gentle strength that would one day reshape the fate of Britain." The valley had done its work. Arthur was becoming whole, soft and strong, humble and wise, ready, though he did not yet know it, for the path destiny had carved for him, a path that would soon lead him out of this sanctuary and into the heart of a broken kingdom, a kingdom waiting for the one who understood that softness, true softness, could move mountains. Years passed gently in the hidden valley, carrying Arthur from childhood into youth like a river guiding a small boat toward the open sea. He grew in grace, in strength, in wisdom, and in a quiet confidence shaped by the valley's peaceful rhythm. But even the safest sanctuary cannot hold destiny forever. And as Arthur stepped into his 15th year, the valley began to feel different, still beautiful, still protective, but tinged with a subtle bitter-sweetness, as though it knew its time with him was coming to an end. Merlin sensed the shift long before Arthur did. One morning, the wizard stood alone on the ridge where the valley met the sky, watching the horizon soften under dawn's first light. He knew what the coming months would bring. He knew the land beyond the hills was in turmoil. And he knew Arthur's peaceful days were numbered. The boy had learned all the valley could teach him. Now the world itself would be his teacher. When the time felt right, Merlin came to Arthur with a gentle firmness. "You must leave the valley," he said simply. Arthur looked up from the wooden staff he had been practicing with. "Now?" Merlin nodded. "Destiny waits for no one, and your moment has arrived." Arthur felt a heaviness settle over him, fear, excitement, sadness, and an ache he couldn't name. "This valley is all I've ever known," he murmured. "Yes," Merlin replied softly, "and that is why you must leave it. No king can serve a broken land if he has only known perfection." Arthur lowered his gaze. He understood. He didn't want to understand, but he did. The guardians gathered to bid him farewell. One by one, they gave him small gifts, nothing grand, but tokens holding deep meaning. A simple cloak that would withstand bitter winters, a cord braided with herbs for protection, a small polished stone from the stream where he first learned to listen. Arthur accepted each with gratitude, and when he embraced them, he did so with the tenderness of someone leaving family. At last, it was Merlin's turn. He handed Arthur a plain leather scabbard empty for now. "This will hold the sword meant for you," Merlin said softly. Arthur frowned. "I have no sword." "You will," Merlin replied. "And when you see it, you will know." Arthur did not press further. He had learned that destiny often revealed itself only at the proper moment. Together, Merlin and Arthur walked through the mist that veiled the valley. It parted slowly, reluctantly, as though wishing to hold him just a little longer. When Arthur stepped beyond the final curl of silver fog, he felt the world sharpen around him. The air was colder, the sky broader, the sounds harsher. For the first time, he understood how sheltered he had been. And yet, something in him straightened, ready to face what lay ahead. They traveled for days across a land fractured by fear and war. Arthur saw villages burned to ash, children with hollow eyes, old men staring at empty fields. He saw men wearing armor without honor, and kings holding titles without purpose. This was Britain, now a land of wound after wound. Arthur's heart ached for it, but Merlin watched him carefully and quietly, noting how the boy did not turn away from suffering, how he did not glance aside or harden his heart. He looked, he listened, he cared, and Merlin felt hope. As winter crept across the land, the two travelers approached a great gathering. Kings, lords, knights, and warriors from across Britain had converged upon London. The throne of Britain stood empty after the death of Uther Pendragon, and no man could claim uncontested right to replace him. Civil war loomed like a storm waiting to break, but the archbishop had called for a peaceful meeting, a rare chance to choose a king by sacred test rather than bloodshed. Merlin said nothing of what he knew. Arthur assumed they were simply passing through. In truth, everything in Merlin's long plan had led to this moment. The city, if it could still be called that, was overflowing with tents, banners, and restless men. The cold air rang with the clang of hammers, the calls of merchants, the mutters of suspicious warriors. Yet at the heart of the old marketplace stood something unexpected, a great stone slab weathered by time. And rising from it, impossibly, was an anvil. Embedded deep within the anvil, shining even under winter's dim sun, was a sword. It was not adorned with jewels or gold. Its hilt was wrapped in simple leather. Its shape was elegant but unassuming. And yet no one who approached it remained unchanged. There was an energy around it, a stillness, as though the sword contained a breath of the world itself. At its base, in letters glowing faintly, was a single inscription: "Whoever pulls this sword from this stone is rightwise king of all Britain." Arthur felt a shiver move down his spine. He could not explain why. He didn't know what the sword meant to him. He only knew he could not look away. All day, men attempted the impossible. Warriors with arms thick as tree trunks leaned against the hilt until their muscles trembled. Nobles pulled with prideful determination. Even kings attempted it, grunting, sweating, snarling in frustration. But the sword did not move, not even an inch. It remained perfectly still, as though part of the stone itself, a silent witness to their desperation. Arthur turned to Merlin. "What is this place?" "Destiny," Merlin replied simply. "And test. Test for what?" Merlin looked at him with eyes full of ancient sadness and hope. "For you," he whispered. Arthur shook his head. "I am no king, no," Merlin said softly. "You are not. Not yet, but you are meant to be." Arthur stepped back, overwhelmed. "I'm just a boy," he murmured. "The valley raised me. I know nothing of kingdoms or crowns." "And that," Merlin replied, "is exactly why you are worthy." The next morning, as frost clung to the ground and breath fluttered like smoke in the cold air, a tournament began: jousts, duels, tests of strength. Arthur was not yet a knight. He served instead as squire to Sir Kay, the foster son of Sir Ector, the man Merlin had entrusted with raising Arthur outside the valley. Arthur did not know of his royal lineage. He believed himself a commoner, but his quiet dignity and gentle heart reflected the truth he had yet to learn. Sir Kay, bold and eager, entered the tournament. Arthur tended to his armor and weapons, polishing them with steady hands. The crowd roared as the contests unfolded. Swords clashed, shields splintered. Men strove for glory while the sword in the stone waited silently. But in the excitement of competition, Kay realized he had forgotten his sword back at their lodging. He turned to Arthur sharply. "Fetch it," he commanded. Arthur nodded and ran, but when he reached the house, the door was locked and no one was inside. Time was slipping away. Kay risked losing his match. Arthur hurried back toward the marketplace, mind racing. He needed a sword, any sword. And then he saw it. The sword in the stone. He hesitated only a moment. He felt no ambition, no desire to claim it, only the simple, earnest wish to help Kay. And so, without ceremony, without witnesses, without even understanding what he was doing, Arthur approached the stone. The world seemed to hush around him. The wind paused. Voices faded. Even the cold felt distant. Arthur laid a hand upon the hilt. It was warm, not the warmth of sunlight or fire, but a deep, living warmth, as though the sword recognized him, as though it remembered him, as though it had waited for this touch. Arthur wrapped his fingers around the hilt. He breathed once, softly. Then he pulled. There was no resistance, no grinding of metal, no trembling of stone. The blade slid free as gently as a sigh. Light shimmered along its length. The winter air brightened. The world felt momentarily weightless. Arthur stood stunned, the sword gleaming in his hand. He looked around, half expecting someone to shout, to accuse him, to stop him. But there was no one. The marketplace was nearly empty. The deed had been done in perfect silence. He stared at the sword, confusion and awe mingling in his chest. He did not feel like a king. He felt like the same boy who had grown among streams and trees. But something in him shifted. Not pride, not fear. Something quieter. Something deeper. As though a new chamber in his heart had opened, echoing with possibility. He brought the sword to Kay. "I found this," Arthur said simply. Kay blinked, astonished. "Where?" Arthur pointed. Kay's eyes widened with disbelief and excitement. He rushed to show Sir Ector, who in turn gathered the nearest lords. Soon, a crowd formed around the stone. When they saw the empty anvil, shouts erupted. Who pulled it? How? When? Arthur stood quietly, bewildered by the attention. He wished he were back in the valley. He wished the world were quieter. But fate had found him. When Arthur admitted he had taken the sword, laughter rippled through the crowd. A boy? A squire? Impossible. They demanded he return it to the stone. Arthur obeyed. The sword slid back easily, as though returning home. The men who had failed earlier tried again. They pulled, they strained, they roared with frustration. But the sword remained fixed. Then they called Arthur forward. His hands trembled slightly. He grasped the hilt. And again, effortlessly, the sword came free. Silence swept the marketplace. Men stared. Women crossed themselves. Old warriors bowed their heads. Some knelt. Others refused to accept what they saw. But the truth stood before them. Merlin stepped from the crowd. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. His voice carried like a warm wind across winter frost. "This," Merlin said, "is the rightful king of Britain." The world held its breath. And Arthur, still young, still humble, still unsure, held the sword not like a conqueror, but like someone entrusted with a fragile gift. He felt no triumph, only responsibility, soft and heavy. Like the first snow of winter, he looked around at the faces, watching him, some full of hope, some of fear, some of disbelief. He felt their expectations press against him. He felt the weight of destiny settling onto his shoulders. And though he did not yet fully understand, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. His life was no longer his own. He was no longer just Arthur of the Hidden Valley. He was Arthur of Britain, Arthur of the storm, Arthur of the sword, a king shaped not by ambition but by humility, a leader forged not by force but by softness, a beacon rising in a land drowning in darkness. In that moment, beneath the cold winter sun, destiny awakened fully, and the story of King Arthur, true king, gentle king, once and future king began. The winter sun hung low above London on the day Arthur pulled the sword from the stone. Its pale light spilled across the frost-covered marketplace, touching the ancient stone, the silent anvil, and the young boy who now held the weapon that no other hand could lift. And even though the cold bit into his skin and the breath of hundreds turned to mist around him, Arthur felt strangely warm, not from pride, not from glory, but from the quiet shock of understanding that destiny was no longer a distant whisper. It was here, standing in his trembling hands. As the echoes of the crowd faded into stunned silence, Arthur looked at Merlin with wide, uncertain eyes. "What do I do now?" he asked softly, the sword glinting faintly in his grip. Merlin's answer was simple. "Now," he said, "you begin." But beginning was never simple. For Britain was not a land waiting peacefully for a leader. It was a land fractured like shattered glass, each shard reflecting a different ambition, a different grudge, a different fear. Dozens of lords claimed the right to rule, some because of blood, some because of strength, some because they believed fate owed them a crown, and none were prepared to bow to a boy. The news spread through the gathered camps like wildfire. A child, a squire, a boy raised in secret, pulled the sacred sword from the stone. The prophecy spoke of a king, but no one imagined the king would be this. Disbelief turned to anger, anger to accusation, accusation to chaos. Arthur stood at the center of the storm, still unsure how he had managed to draw the sword at all. He felt the crowd press inward, voices rising, hands pointing, doubt thick in the air. But Merlin did not move. He stood beside Arthur, a quiet pillar of unshakable certainty. "Hello," I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. But humility, stillness, a steadiness unusual for one his age. One by one, these men knelt. Sir Ector, the man who had raised him, knelt first with tears in his eyes. Sir Kay followed, confusion softening into admiration. Then others Bedivere, Geraint, and several unnamed knights weary of endless conflict. As their knees touched the frost, the air shifted. Hope, small and fragile, flickered in the cold. But hope alone could not win a fractured kingdom. After the sword in the stone was accepted by the church, though not yet by the nobles, Arthur was crowned in a modest ceremony. There was no golden throne, no lavish feast, no thunderous applause, only candlelight, only the soft chanting of monks, only the quiet weight of a crown placed upon the head of a boy who did not yet feel like a king. When Arthur opened his eyes, the world felt heavier. He was escorted to the old Roman fortress at Camelot, which had been chosen as his early seat of rule. It was a cold place, stone walls cracked by time, hallways echoing with memories of an empire long gone, tapestries torn by neglect, and an emptiness that seemed to sigh with every step he took. Arthur looked around and whispered to Merlin, "This is a king's home?" Merlin's answer was quiet. "No, Arthur. This is a land waiting for a king to make it a home." "Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." More than once, he bit his tongue to keep from speaking out of turn. More than once, he looked to Merlin for silent guidance. But Merlin offered no answers, only the calm assurance that Arthur must find his own footing. On one of those early mornings, before the council gathered, Merlin led Arthur to the fortress walls. They watched the fog roll across the fields below. "You must remember what the valley taught you," Merlin said softly. Arthur closed his eyes. "The strength of softness." "Yes," Merlin whispered. "Let their hardness break upon your softness. Do not fight pride with pride. Do not meet anger with anger. Let them exhaust themselves against the calm they cannot understand." Arthur breathed deeply. The fog parted for a moment, revealing the patchwork of farms and forests beyond small homes scattered across the land he must now protect. When the council assembled that day, Arthur entered quietly, not demanding attention, not asserting authority, simply present, and something subtle shifted. For the first time, the lords paused when he spoke, not because his voice was loud, not because he wielded power, but because his calm unsettled them. They expected a boy flustered by their authority. They found instead a boy who listened, who considered, who asked questions with sincerity rather than arrogance. They found a boy who was not trying to win the room, but to understand it. Slowly, the initial scorn softened into reluctant curiosity. Yet the kingdom's problems were immense. The Saxons pressed harder from the east. The Picts raided from the north. The western tribes resented Roman influence. Small warbands roamed the countryside, extorting villages too weak to defend themselves. Trade routes collapsed. Crops failed in regions still scarred by past battles. Even the church was divided, some priests supporting Arthur's claim, others resisting it fiercely. And through it all, Arthur walked the fragile line between being a boy and being a king. He spent his early days traveling through the lands near Camelot, often in disguise. Merlin encouraged this. "You cannot rule a land you do not know," he told him. So Arthur visited tiny hamlets hidden in forests. He walked dusty roads where frost gathered in the shadows. He slept under simple roofs where families shared bread and stories of hardship. He listened to their fears, their hopes, their memories of a Britain that once thrived under Roman order. From these journeys, Arthur learned more than any counsel could teach him. He learned the sound of despair in a farmer's voice. He learned the way hope flickered in children's eyes. He learned the quiet courage of women who kept households alive despite famine. He learned how fear spread like a cold wind, chilling entire communities. But he also learned something else, something precious, something powerful. He learned that the people wanted peace more than they wanted victory. They wanted unity more than they wanted conquest. They wanted a king who saw them, who listened to them, who cared. And Arthur cared deeply. One evening, Arthur returned to the fortress with mud on his boots and smoke still clinging to his cloak from a farmer's hearth. Merlin met him in the great hall. "You've changed," the wizard murmured. Arthur looked down at his hands. "I've seen their suffering," he said. "I've seen their courage. If I am to be their king, I must be worthy of them." Merlin smiled softly. "And that," he said, "is the beginning of kingship." But not everyone welcomed Arthur's compassion. Many lords saw it as weakness. Some plotted behind closed doors. Others openly defied him. They questioned his legitimacy. They withheld troops. They refused taxes. They whispered in corners about removing him. One winter night, a group of nobles confronted Arthur in the council hall. Torches flickered against the stone walls. Their faces glowed with anger. "You are too soft," one said. "You show mercy where strength is needed," growled another. "A boy cannot rule men," declared a third. Arthur felt their words strike him like cold arrows. He felt his heartbeat quicken. His hands trembled slightly. But he remembered Merlin's lessons. He took a breath, then another. Then he stood not tall, not imposing, but steady. "I do not rule you with a sword," he said quietly. "I rule you with responsibility. If softness offends you, then perhaps it is because you have forgotten kindness." The hall fell silent. The nobles stared, some with shame, some with fury, some with reluctant admiration. And though Arthur's words did not win their loyalty, they planted something far more important, a seed of respect, one that would grow with time. Yet the kingdom's challenges grew heavier. Saxon raids intensified. Villages begged for protection. Messages streamed into Camelot daily pleading, desperate, afraid. Arthur knew he could not rely on divided lords. He needed unity, not forced unity. Not unity built on fear, but unity built on trust, on shared purpose, on something deeper than politics. And so, slowly, Arthur began gathering around him a circle of young knights, men who believed in him before he had proven himself. Some were sons of lesser lords, some were wanderers, some were warriors who desired not glory but meaning. Kay stood at his right hand, Guinevere at his left. Others joined Geraint, Balin, Pellinore. They trained together, ate together, laughed together. They saw Arthur not as a child, but as a heart beating with rare sincerity. It was not yet the Round Table, not yet the fellowship that would shape legends. But it was the beginning. One evening, after a particularly tense council meeting, Arthur wandered alone into the fortress courtyard. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting silently onto the worn flagstones. He stood under the dark sky, feeling the cold settle gently on his skin. He closed his eyes, and in the stillness he whispered, "I am trying, but I do not know if I am enough." Merlin appeared beside him with the ease of someone stepping out of a dream. "Do you know what makes a king enough?" the wizard asked quietly. Arthur opened his eyes. "What?" "That he tries," Merlin said simply. "That he chooses the harder path. That he feels the weight of his crown and still stands beneath it." Arthur swallowed. "It is heavy." Merlin nodded. "It should be." As snow thickened around them, Merlin placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "You are not alone," he said. "The land chose you, and I believe in its choice." Arthur looked up, watching snow settle on the sword he carried at his side. Excalibur, though he did not yet know its name, the blade that had affirmed his destiny, the blade that would one day become a symbol of hope, and though doubt still clung to him like winter frost, Arthur felt a warmth inside him, a quiet resolve, a strength born not of certainty but of commitment. He would not be the king they expected. He would be the king the land needed. In the days that followed, Arthur faced new challenges, threats from ambitious nobles, raids from Saxon warbands, conflicts between rival tribes. But slowly, so slowly, few noticed at first, his gentleness began to reshape the kingdom. Villagers spoke of the young king who visited them without guards. Travelers spoke of a leader who listened rather than commanded. Knights spoke of a king who trained beside them as an equal. Even some lords began to soften, seeing that humility was not a weakness but a rare strength. And though Britain remained broken, cracks began to fill not with mortar, but with hope. Arthur knew the road ahead was long. He knew darker storms were coming, but for now, he walked through the fragile dawn of his new reign with steady steps, steps shaped by the valley, by Merlin, by the sword, by destiny, by softness stronger than hardness. And somewhere deep within the land, beneath forests, rivers, hills, and ancient stones, Britain felt a shift, a breath, a quiet stirring, as though the island itself whispered, "Our king has begun." The first fragile months of Arthur's reign had been marked by uncertainty, resistance, and the heavy work of holding together a land frayed by years of grief. But as winter thawed into spring and the countryside softened beneath new growth, something subtle changed in Britain. The cold anger of the nobles eased slightly. The despair of the villagers lightened. The restless fear in the air quieted, if only a little. It was as though the land itself sensed that its new king, still young, still learning, carried with him a promise unlike any before. A promise not built on force, but on unity. Not on fear, but on hope. And quietly, almost invisibly, that hope began to draw others toward him. Whispers traveled from camp to camp, from monastery to village, from hearth to marketplace. They say the young king listens. They say he walks among the common folk. They say he does not raise his sword unless he must. They say he might be different. In those early days, Arthur had no capital worthy of a king. Caerleon was crumbling. Winchester was controlled by rival lords. London, despite the miracle of the sword, was too fractured, too bitter, too dangerous to claim. Britain had fortresses and ruins, but no true heart. No place where the land could gather around a shared dream. Arthur felt this absence deeply. He felt it every time he stood before his small council, surrounded by tired knights and suspicious nobles. He felt it every time he rode into a village and saw the emptiness in the eyes of the people. He felt it every time he stood alone at night, staring at the stars, wondering how a kingdom could stand when it had no center. It was Merlin who first spoke the name. They were sitting beneath an oak outside Camelot. As they often did in the quiet hours of late evening, crickets hummed in the tall grass. The air smelled faintly of river water and distant wood smoke. Arthur had been speaking softly about the need for a place where all people could gather. A place not owned by any one tribe or region. A place that belonged to the future rather than the past. Merlin listened with stillness, then finally said, "Camelot." Arthur looked up. "What is Camelot?" Merlin closed his eyes, as though remembering something ancient. "It is not what it is," the wizard murmured. "It is what it can become." Arthur frowned. "A dream?" "A dream," Merlin agreed softly. "And dreams, Arthur, are the foundations of every great age." The name lingered in the night air, gentle and mysterious. Camelot, a word with no boundaries, a word shaped by longing, a word that sounded like the memory of something lost, and the promise of something new. In the following days, Arthur could not shake the name from his thoughts. He whispered it as he walked the ramparts of Caerleon. He murmured it as he rode through forests echoing with birdsong. He breathed it under his breath as he watched the sun rise over the hills. Camelot, Camelot, Camelot. It felt like an answer to a question he had not fully understood. And so, Arthur asked Merlin to guide him to the place where this dream might be built. Merlin nodded, as though he had known the request would come. He led Arthur and a small company of knights westward, through winding paths that seemed to shift each time they looked away, through forests where mist curled like silver ribbons, through valleys where old ruins slept beneath moss and ivy, through hills where the wind whispered in ancient tongues. Finally, after days of quiet travel, they reached a plateau overlooking a wide river bend. The land stretched outward in soft curves, green and golden beneath the afternoon sun. Wild flowers swayed in gentle waves. The river glimmered like polished glass, and at the highest point of the plateau stood the remnants of an old Roman fort, weathered stone walls, crumbling towers, and an arch still half intact. Arthur dismounted slowly, gazing across the landscape with steady wonder. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes," Merlin replied, "but more importantly, it is free." Arthur turned to him. "Free? No tribe claims it," Merlin said. "No lord has tried to seize it. It sits between worlds, between north and south, east and west, neutral, waiting." Arthur stepped forward, letting the wind carry through his hair. He walked along the edge of the plateau. He stood near the ruins of the old Roman walls. He knelt to touch the earth. He felt a warmth there, a quiet pulse, a gentle invitation. "This place," Arthur whispered. "It feels like the valley." Merlin nodded. "It remembers." And in that moment, Arthur knew this would be the heart of his kingdom. This would be the place where dreams took form. This would be Camelot. Construction began slowly, and at first, few believed in it. Some lords scoffed at the idea of building a capital in a place so empty. Others mocked the notion of a city of peace in a land torn by war. But Arthur persisted. He worked with his own hands, lifting stones, carrying timber, shaping the foundations of what would one day become legend. His knights followed suit, inspired by his humility. Villagers from nearby settlements came to help, curious but hopeful. Travelers stopped to lend strength. Monks arrived with tools. Merchants brought materials. Smiths carried hammers. Carpenters brought dreams. And slowly, stone by stone, beam by beam, Camelot began to rise. The first structures were simple wooden halls, work sheds, makeshift barracks. But Arthur never forgot the vision. He wanted a place where warriors could lay down their swords, where scholars could share their knowledge, where farmers could come without fear, where children could play in safety, a place where unity could breathe. He walked the construction grounds daily, greeting workers by name, thanking them for their efforts. He listened to their ideas, their concerns, their hopes. He slept in a tent like everyone else, refusing the luxury of a royal chamber until the people had proper homes. Merlin observed him quietly, his eyes filled with quiet pride. The boy who had grown in the valley now shaped a valley of his own, one built on compassion instead of secrecy, community instead of solitude. As weeks stretched into months, Camelot's character took form. The Great Hall was the first grand structure to rise, a vast wooden and stone building with high beams that arched like the inside of an ancient cathedral. It was built not for feasts, but for gatherings, for councils, for shared decisions, for acts of justice. Arthur insisted the hall have no throne raised above the others. He wanted no symbol of distance between himself and his people. The master builders offered him platforms, gilded chairs, elevated seats. He refused everyone. He asked instead for a simple chair, carved from oak, level with the seats of his advisors. A king, he told them, is not above his people. He stands among them. Next came the ramparts, strong stone walls that curved gracefully around the plateau. They were not meant to intimidate, but to protect. Arthur designed them with wide walkways, so that guards could see far across the land without obstruction. He insisted that the gates be broad and welcoming. "Let Camelot be a place where no one fears to enter," he said. But the most important of Camelot's early structures was a courtyard, the central square of the city. It was wide and open, centered around a fountain fed by the river's pure water. Flowers were planted in circular beds. Trees were brought in from nearby forests. Children ran and played there even while the city was still being built. Arthur watched them one afternoon and murmured to Merlin, "If they can laugh, then we are building something real." And Camelot was becoming real. More settlers arrived, artists seeking inspiration, blacksmiths seeking purpose, healers seeking peace. Storytellers came with tales, farmers came with seeds, masons came with skills. Camelot grew like a living organism, shaped by the dreams of all who touched it. For the first time in decades, Britain felt the stirrings of unity. But as Camelot rose, so did Arthur. He grew more confident, more certain, more grounded. He trained with his knights every morning, sweat on his brow, determination in his movements. He studied governance with monks. He sought counsel from druids. He listened to the wisdom of common folk. And through it all, he held on to the softness that had shaped him. One evening, as he walked the half-built ramparts, he found Merlin waiting for him. The wizard looked older, though Arthur could not say why. "You've done well," Merlin said quietly. Arthur looked at the glowing lanterns below, the flicker of life in a city still finding its form. "It's not finished," he whispered. "No," Merlin agreed. "Nothing worth building ever is." Arthur leaned against the warm stone. "Do you think it will last?" Merlin studied him. "Camelot will last," he said softly, "but not because of its walls, or its towers, or its halls. It will last because of what it represents." Arthur watched the torches sway in the evening breeze. "And what is that?" Merlin smiled gently. "The impossible." Arthur frowned. "The impossible?" "Yes," Merlin said. "For Camelot is not a city, Arthur. It is a belief. The belief that people can rise above their divisions. That justice can be equal. That hope can be shared. That peace is not a dream, but a choice." Arthur fell silent. The weight of those words settled into him like roots taking hold. For years, Britain had believed peace was impossible, unity was impossible, honor was impossible. But here, on this plateau, a new truth was forming. Perhaps the impossible was simply something that had never been tried with enough heart. Over the following months, Camelot continued to grow not only in size, but in spirit. Travelers spoke of it with awe. Some said it glowed at dawn, its walls catching the first light like gold. Some said the river sang as it flowed past its gates. Some said it felt blessed, an oasis of calm in a world of chaos. And though much of that was embellishment, there was a kernel of truth beneath every story. Camelot was special, not perfect, not finished, but special. Arthur spent his evenings in the growing great hall, planning, dreaming, and listening to those who came seeking guidance. Merlin walked the corridors at night, whispering blessings into the stone. The knights trained in the courtyard, their laughter echoing against freshly built walls. And the people, ordinary people, began to imagine a future that did not frighten them. One night, Arthur stood alone on the great hall's threshold, looking out at the moonlit city. The wind carried faint music from the courtyard. Lanterns glowed warmly in the windows of newly built homes. And above it all, The stars shimmered quiet witnesses to a dream taking shape. Arthur clasped the scabbard at his side. He felt the familiar hum of the sword inside it. A reminder of destiny, a reminder of promise, a reminder of responsibility. "This is only the beginning," he whispered to the night. The wind answered softly, "Yes." Camelot would soon become a legend, a symbol, a beacon. But in these early days, it was simply a dream made visible, a fragile miracle growing stronger with each stone placed, each seed planted, each heart that chose hope over despair. And Arthur, still young, still learning, walked among its foundations not as a ruler above his people, but as a servant beside them. Camelot was impossible, and yet, there it stood, a city born from hope, shaped by unity, guarded by compassion, and destined to change the world. Camelot was rising, stone by stone, heart by heart, belief by belief. The impossible city was becoming real. Its towers touched the sky like hopeful hands reaching toward dawn. Its courtyards filled with the laughter of workers and children. Its walls, though still unfinished, carried the strength of unity, not conquest. And at the center of it all was Arthur, the young king who walked among his people not as a distant ruler, but as a companion on a shared journey. Yet even as Camelot blossomed, Arthur sensed something was missing, something essential, something that would transform a city into a kingdom, a group of knights into a brotherhood, and a dream into a living institution. He felt it in his bones each night when he looked at the unfinished great hall. He felt it each morning when he watched his knights train in the soft golden light. He felt it whenever he sat alone, listening to the hum of Camelot breathing around him. The city was strong, the people were hopeful, but unity, true unity, needed a shape, a form, a symbol, a declaration. That symbol would come in the shape of a table, not a throne, not a sword, but a table simple yet radical, gentle yet powerful, humble yet transformative. It would be the heart of Camelot, the soul of Arthur's reign, and the quiet revolution that would redefine what leadership meant. But before the table itself existed, the idea had to be born. One late evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the great hall's wooden beams, Arthur gathered with his closest knights. Kay sat polishing his blade. Guinevere leaned against a column, deep in thought. Geraint warmed his hands by the fire. Others sat scattered around, their faces lit softly by the flames. Merlin, of course, watched from the far side, his gaze quiet and knowing. Arthur stood in the center of the hall, listening to the faint echo of their conversations. He saw their camaraderie, he saw their potential, but he also saw their differences, their rivalries, their lingering pride, their backgrounds shaped by tribes and families that still carried old grudges. He wanted more than loyalty. He wanted brotherhood. He wanted equality. He wanted a circle of hearts as steadfast as the walls being raised outside. A sudden gust of wind passed through the open doorway, rustling the torches. Arthur felt something stirring inside him. He turned to Merlin. "We need a place to gather," Arthur whispered. Merlin nodded slowly. "Not a throne room," Arthur continued. "No," Merlin agreed. "Something else." "A space for decisions," Arthur said. "A space where every voice is heard. A space without division. A space without a head or foot." Merlin's eyes warmed. "What shape does such a space take?" he asked softly. Arthur paused. His gaze drifted across the hall, settling on the circular shadow forming beneath the chandelier. "A circle," he murmured. Merlin smiled as though the world had just exhaled a long-held breath. "A circle," he echoed. "The simplest shape, and the most powerful." Arthur felt his heart steady. He imagined a round table, a place where rank did not determine value, where no knight sat above another, where no man ruled the conversation simply because of the chair he occupied. a place where unity had formed, a place where the ideals of Camelot could live. The next morning, Arthur summoned the finest carpenters and smiths in the city. He described his vision not in terms of grandeur, but in terms of meaning. The table must be broad, he said, but it must not overwhelm the room. It must be strong, he added, but not so ornate that it divides us. It must be round, he insisted, so that no knight sits at the head, and so that all who gather feel equal. The craftsmen exchanged puzzled glances. No king had ever asked for such a thing. Kings usually demanded thrones, symbols of dominance, structures that elevated them above others. But Arthur asked for humility. He asked for unity. He asked for a table. The work began at once. Massive timbers were brought from the forest, oak trees older than anyone living in Camelot. Their rings told stories of centuries. Their roots had held fast through storms stronger than memory, and Arthur believed that anything meant to last must be built from something that had already endured so much. The beams were cut and shaped, the edges were smoothed, the legs were carved with patterns representing the seasons: spring for hope, summer for fullness, autumn for change, winter for endurance. Merlin visited the workshop many nights, laying quiet enchantments of protection and harmony upon the wood. Not spells of power, but blessings, whispers of balance, whispers of peace. When the table was complete, it was magnificent in its simplicity, broad enough for dozens of knights, beautiful in the glow of torchlight, warm to the touch, circular, endless, equal. The day the table was brought into the great hall is remembered as one of the most important days in Arthur's early reign. Men from across the city gathered to watch as teams of workers carried it through the central walkway. The hall fell silent as the table was set down upon the stone floor. Its surface gleamed in the flickering light, smooth and inviting. Arthur approached it slowly, his heart full. He placed his hand on the wood, feeling its warmth, its weight, its promise. "This," Arthur said softly, "is the heart of Camelot." The knights stood behind him, uncertain. A table? How could a table change anything? How could something so simple become the foundation of a world they had yet to imagine? Arthur turned to face them. "You are not just warriors," he said. "You are guardians of a dream larger than kingdoms, larger than bloodlines, larger than ambition." His voice was gentle, but it resonated in the hall like a soft bell. "You will sit here," he continued. "At this table, there is no head, no seat of power, no man above another. You are equals not because you were born so, but because you choose to be so." The knights exchanged glances. They had sworn loyalty to Arthur. They had fought beside him. They had seen his compassion. But this was new. This was strange. This was revolutionary. Kay stepped forward first, resting his hand on the table's surface. He looked at Arthur with a mix of admiration and awe. "It feels right," he said quietly. Guinevere followed, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "A round table for a round world," he murmured. Gawain stepped forward next, offering a small smile. "Let us be worthy of it," he said. One by one, the knights came. They placed their hands upon the table, feeling the warmth, feeling its symbolism, feeling its call. And in those simple touches, something shifted, something unspoken, something profound. For the first time, they were not just Arthur's knights. They were something more. They were a fellowship. When all had gathered around the table, Arthur took his seat, not at a head, but among them. He looked at the circle of faces before him, some scarred, some young, some weary, some proud. He saw men shaped by war, men shaped by loss, men shaped by hope. He saw those who would one day become legends, and he spoke the words that would become the foundation of Camelot's philosophy. "We will protect the weak," Arthur said. "We will honor truth. We will seek justice. We will show mercy before judgment. We will fight only when no other path remains. We will hold ourselves to a higher standard than any law requires. But above all," he said, his voice soft and unwavering, "we will be united." The knights bowed their heads in solemn agreement, not forced, not bound by fear, but bound by choice, by belief, by the table. That day, the Round Table became more than wood. It became a declaration, a vow, a quiet revolution, a promise that Camelot would be a different kind of kingdom, not built on power, but on purpose, not built on domination, but on cooperation, not built on hierarchy, but on fellowship. Word of the Round Table spread quickly. At first, people did not understand. "A round table?" they asked. "What does that mean?" But as travelers came to Camelot, peasants, merchants, bards, they saw something extraordinary. They saw knights who listened. They saw a king who shared his seat. They saw decisions made with fairness rather than favor. Slowly, the truth settled into the hearts of the people. The table was not a symbol of authority. It was a symbol of possibility. People began to believe that justice could be real, that unity could be real, that peace, however fragile, could be real. Camelot gained a new identity, not as a fortress, not as a palace, but as a sanctuary of ideals, a place where good men grew better, a place where honor breathed. Even rival kingdoms began to whisper about the Round Table. Some mocked it, some feared it, but many quietly, secretly admired it. For in a world defined by division, the idea of a circle of equals was radical, revolutionary, impossible. And yet, there it stood. One night, long after the hall had emptied and the torches burned low, Arthur sat alone at the Round Table. He rested his hands on its smooth surface. The room was quiet, still, soft, a gentle place in a harsh world. Merlin stepped out of the shadows, his eyes kind. "Are you proud of it?" he asked. Arthur thought for a moment. "No," he said softly. "I'm grateful for it." "And why is that?" Merlin asked. Arthur traced the grain of the oak with his fingertips. "Because I built this table to unite the knights," he whispered. "But I think it might unite the world." Merlin smiled. "That," he said, "is why it had to be round." Arthur looked up. "So that unity has no end?" "So that unity," Merlin replied gently, "has no corners to hide in." The two shared a quiet moment, king and mentor, student and teacher, dreamer and guide. And as they stood at the heart of the great hall, the Round Table glowed softly in the firelight, a warm circle of promise. Camelot was no longer just a city. It was an idea, a beacon, a dream given form. And the Round Table, simple, humble, perfect, was its beating heart. With the creation of the Round Table, Arthur's kingdom entered a new chapter. The knights would soon embark on quests. Conflicts would test their unity. Love and jealousy would shape their paths. Great triumphs and great tragedies awaited them. But for now, in the quiet glow of the lanterns, Camelot breathed the calm before the storm. The Round Table stood ready. The knights stood ready. Arthur stood ready. A new world had begun. Camelot was growing into its strength. The Round Table had taken root in the hearts of Arthur's knights. The city's walls were rising higher. Its people were smiling more often. A soft light, hopeful and warm, seemed to settle over the land. But even in this season of beginnings, destiny was preparing its next movement. A movement shaped not from stone or wood, but from flesh and spirit. For Camelot was ready for a knight unlike any who had come before. A knight who would elevate Arthur's dream to its greatest heights, and challenge the king's heart in ways no enemy ever could. This knight's name was Lancelot. His story began far from Camelot. Across forests thick with shadow, across valleys where wind sang ancient songs, across mountains that pierced the clouds, there, to the south, lay the kingdom of Benoic, fractured, weary, and fighting for survival. It was a land shaped by endless conflict, ruled by a noble man named King Ban. Ban was brave, loyal, and steadfast, a friend of Arthur's father in the days before Britain shattered. But Ban's kingdom was besieged by enemies who grew bolder with every passing year. The king fought valiantly, but fate had turned against him. And in the midst of that turmoil was his only son, a boy named Lancelot. Lancelot grew up among the smoke of burning villages and the cries of wounded soldiers. His childhood was not shaped by tranquility, but by urgency, not by gentle lessons, but by brutal realities. And yet beneath it all he carried a heart full of unusual purity. He was fierce, yes, quick, yes, gifted beyond understanding. But he was also compassionate, thoughtful, quiet, in the way a deep lake is quiet, holding storms beneath the surface. From the time he was old enough to lift a wooden sword, people whispered that he was destined for greatness. They whispered that he fought like a man twice his age, that he moved with a grace beyond training, that he possessed a light even the darkest days could not extinguish. But destiny is rarely gentle. When Lancelot was still young, Ban's enemies launched a devastating attack. The kingdom fell into ruin. The castle burned. Lancelot and his mother fled into the night, surrounded by smoke and grief. They ran until their legs could carry them no farther, and when at last they collapsed at the edge of an ancient forest, the world seemed to break. King Ban had fallen. Benoic was gone. Lancelot's childhood ended in that single moment. It was in the heart of that grief that something miraculous occurred. A shimmering light descended through the trees. A figure emerged, neither mortal nor entirely divine. The Lady of the Lake, guardian of Avalon, keeper of hidden truths. She came to the grieving mother and the trembling child and offered sanctuary. Not in the mortal world, but in the other world, the land where time flows slowly and magic breathes like wind. Lancelot was taken into Avalon, raised in a place where shadows danced like memories and waters glowed with starlight. There he trained years spent perfecting skill, discipline, and heart. The lady sharpened his body, the land sharpened his spirit, and Avalon sharpened his destiny. By the time he reached manhood, Lancelot had become a warrior unlike any other, swift as a hawk, strong as an oak, graceful as water. But more importantly, he carried a deep humility, for even in his unmatched skill, he felt unworthy of praise. The Lady of the Lake sensed this in him and knew, one day, this man would walk beside Arthur. One day, he would elevate Camelot. One day, he would break it and himself in equal measure. But that time had not yet come. Lancelot left Avalon with the lady's blessing, stepping back into the mortal world with a heart full of longing and purpose. He had heard whispers of Camelot, a city rising from hope, led by a young king who believed in justice and unity. A city that called to Lancelot like a distant star. He felt drawn toward it, compelled by a pull he could not explain. And so he began his journey north. The road to Camelot was long. Lancelot traveled through forests where dew clung to leaves like crystal tears. He crossed rivers that shimmered with early dawn light. He slept beneath ancient oaks and listened to the sounds of the night owl calls, crackling firewood, the quiet hum of the world. He helped villagers rebuild fallen fences. He defended travelers from bandits. He rode with a purpose deeper than ambition. And with each passing mile, he felt destiny shaping the path beneath his feet. Camelot appeared at last on the horizon, rising from the earth like a dream made real. Its walls glowed in the sunlight, its banners fluttered in the wind. Its towers stood tall and proud, not as symbols of dominance, but as beacons. Lancelot's breath caught in his chest. He felt as though he were looking at the very heart of the world. For Camelot did not merely exist upon the land. It shimmered with purpose. It thrummed with meaning. It called to something deep within him. He crossed the drawbridge with quiet awe, his horse's hooves clicking softly on the stone. Knights training in the courtyard paused to watch him. They sensed something unusual in the way he rode, calm, elegant, present, like a man born for both shadow and light. One knight approached with a curious smile. "State your business," he said. Lancelot dismounted. "I seek to serve the king," he replied, his voice steady but humble. The knight raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think the king seeks you?" Lancelot hesitated. He did not wish to boast. He simply answered truthfully. "I do not know," he said, "but I feel the land has guided me here." Word of his arrival reached Arthur quickly. The king, intrigued, came to see him personally. Arthur approached with open curiosity, dressed not in royal finery, but in simple training clothes. He looked like a knight himself, strong, young, and quietly confident. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Recognition, respect, a subtle, unspoken understanding, as though they were two halves of a story neither yet realized they were part of. Arthur extended a hand. "I am Arthur," he said. Lancelot bowed his head. "My king," he murmured. "Tell me your name," Arthur requested. "Lancelot," he answered. "Of Benoic." Arthur's expression softened with empathy. "I have heard of your father," he said. "A brave man." Lancelot's chest tightened, but he nodded silently. "Come," Arthur said, sensing the sadness but not pressing it. "Walk with me." They walked through Camelot's courtyard as knights trained around them. The clang of steel rang through the air, but it felt distant, like the rhythm of a heartbeat far away. Arthur studied Lancelot from the corner of his eye. The young man moved with a poise he had rarely seen outside the valley. Calm, balanced, soft yet powerful. It reminded Arthur of something deep within himself, something he had inherited from his childhood, from the valley, from Merlin's teachings, as though Lancelot embodied the same principles Arthur had been raised with, but shaped by a different world. A world of fire instead of mist, storm instead of calm. "You move like someone who has trained many years," Arthur said. Lancelot shrugged slightly. "I have tried to learn what I could." Arthur smiled. "Would you show me?" Lancelot blinked. "Show you?" "Yes," Arthur said warmly. "Let us train together." The knights paused as Arthur stepped into the training ring, picking up a wooden practice sword. Lancelot hesitated, then took the one offered him. The two circled each other. Arthur moved first, quick, precise, intentional. Lancelot responded with fluid grace, deflecting without force, turning Arthur's momentum aside with effortless economy. They exchanged blows, each movement echoing like poetry. The knights watched in stunned silence. Merlin appeared at the edge of the courtyard, eyes narrowing with interest. Arthur lunged. Lancelot shifted. Their blades crossed softly, beautifully, like dancers touching hands. Arthur exhaled in awe. You fight like water," Arthur whispered. Lancelot smiled for the first time. "I was taught that water carves mountains by yielding." Arthur's heart stirred. "That is the wisdom I was raised with," he said softly. Lancelot looked at him with quiet amazement. "Then we are alike," he murmured. Arthur shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You are my reflection." Their sparring ended, but a bond had begun. A bond deeper than friendship, deeper than brotherhood. A bond of recognition, two souls shaped by softness in a world ruled by hardness. Arthur led Lancelot into the great hall. He showed him the round table. The great circle glowed in the lantern light, a symbol of unity and hope. Lancelot ran his fingers along the smooth oak surface. "It is beautiful," he whispered. "It is a promise," Arthur corrected softly. "A promise of equality, a promise of justice, a promise of peace." Lancelot closed his eyes. "I wish to be worthy of such a table," he whispered. Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. "I believe you already are." That night, Arthur gathered the knights. He stood at the table, Lancelot beside him. "This man," Arthur said, "is unlike any I have met. He fights with grace, he carries wisdom, he serves without pride." Arthur paused. "He reflects the ideals of this kingdom." Lancelot bowed deeply. "I am honored," he said quietly. Arthur smiled. "Rise, Lancelot of Benoic." Lancelot lifted his gaze. "You are now a knight of Camelot." A soft murmur spread through the hall. Approval, curiosity, warmth. Lancelot stepped to an empty seat at the circle. It felt as though the table welcomed him, as though the wood itself recognized the missing piece had arrived. From that day forward, Lancelot became the greatest knight in Camelot, not merely in skill, but in heart. And Arthur found in him the companion he had never known he needed, the mirror he had never expected, the equal he had longed for. Together, they would elevate Camelot to heights it had never dreamed of. Together, they would forge a legacy, and together, they would walk a path filled with triumph and tragedy. But for now, in the quiet glow of Camelot's lanterns, their story was just beginning. Two men, one dream, one kingdom, and a bond that would shape the fate of Britain. Camelot had gained strength with each passing season. The round table was whole. The knights were united. Lancelot's arrival had brought a brilliance no one could deny. And Arthur, still young yet impossibly wise, stood at the center of a kingdom rising from dream to reality. But even the greatest dreams require more than stone and steel, more than counsel and courage. They require balance, softness to temper strength, warmth to temper duty, grace to temper resolve. Camelot, for all its glory, still lacked something essential. It lacked a queen, and destiny, with its quiet precision, had already chosen the woman whose presence would both elevate and unravel the kingdom. Her name was Guinevere. Her story began far from Camelot, in the golden fields of Camelot, a small but noble kingdom bordered by forests thick with sunlight. Guinevere was the daughter of King Leodegrance, a loyal ally of Arthur's father during the old wars. Her childhood had been shaped by music, learning, long afternoons beneath fruit trees, and a softness that came from being deeply loved. But beyond the gentleness, Guinevere carried a quiet intelligence that surprised those who underestimated her. She watched people closely, listened deeply, understood motives with a clarity often lost on others. She could speak to nobles with poise, speak to farmers with warmth, speak to children with laughter. Guinevere's presence was not loud, not forceful, not commanding, but it lingered, like the echo of a song you cannot forget. She first heard of Arthur from traveling merchants and wandering bards. They told stories of the young king of Camelot, humble, brave, wise beyond his years. They spoke of his round table, his knights, his dream of equality, his refusal to place himself above his people. And though Guinevere listened with curiosity, she did not imagine their paths would cross. Not yet, not until destiny intervened. Arthur, too, had begun to feel the absence of a queen, not because he sought romance, not because he desired companionship, but because Camelot needed someone who could hold its heart. A kingdom built on unity required a symbol of harmony, a queen capable of being both strength and softness. Merlin sensed this long before Arthur admitted it. One evening, as the torches burned low in the great hall, Merlin approached him. "You have built a kingdom," Merlin said, "but a kingdom needs more than a king." Arthur looked up, understanding the unspoken meaning. "You speak of a queen." "Yes," Merlin said, "a queen who will steady your steps, soften your burdens, and carry a part of your heart that even I cannot reach." Arthur fell silent. A long moment passed. Who? Merlin smiled gently. You will know when you meet her. The meeting happened in spring. Camelot was at its most beautiful, flowers blooming, banners fluttering, the river singing against its banks. Arthur rode out with a small escort to deliver aid to Camelot, which had suffered a harsh winter. He expected a formal greeting, a diplomatic exchange, perhaps a quiet meal at the king's table. He did not expect Guinevere. She stepped into the courtyard as they arrived, sunlight glinting through her dark hair, her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Arthur dismounted. He had met noble women before, but something about her presence settled into him like a deep breath. There was a softness in her expression, but not fragility, a gentleness in her movements, but not weakness. It was a softness similar to the lessons he had learned in the valley, the kind of softness that reshapes the world without force. Guinevere curtsied gracefully. "Welcome to Camelot, my king," she said softly. Arthur bowed his head. "Please, call me Arthur." She smiled, a small smile, but it was enough to shift something deep within him. Over the next few days, they spoke often, not of politics or war, but of music, nature, stories, and dreams. Arthur found himself drawn to her voice, steady and melodic. Guinevere found herself drawn to his sincerity. He did not boast. He did not posture. He listened. He cared. He looked at her not as a prize, but as a person. One evening, as they walked beneath the orchard trees, Guinevere paused to touch a blossom. "It seems your kingdom grows with the seasons," she murmured. Arthur nodded. "I only hope I am worthy of it." She looked at him with gentle certainty. "I believe you are worthy of far more than you realize." Her words settled in Arthur's heart like warm sunlight. For the first time, he felt seen not only as a king, but as a man. When Arthur returned to Camelot, he carried her memory with him, her voice, her smile, her steady presence. He realized, with quiet clarity, that the kingdom needed her, that he needed her. Not out of loneliness, but out of alignment. Her spirit matched his dream, her heart matched his purpose. Merlin confirmed what Arthur already felt. "She is the balance," Merlin said. "She will be the queen who strengthens your reign." Arthur nodded, and so he sent a request to Camelot, a humble, sincere request for Guinevere's hand. Her father agreed with joy. Guinevere, after a long moment of introspective silence, whispered yes. When she arrived at Camelot, the city bloomed anew, not because of ceremony or spectacle, but because of her presence. Her kindness rippled through the people. She visited the gardens. She spoke with the workers. She tended to the sick. She listened to the old. She laughed with the young. Arthur watched with quiet awe. He had built a kingdom of stone and ideals. Guinevere built one of warmth and connection. Camelot felt complete. The wedding was simple music, flowers, laughter echoing against the castle walls. Lancelot stood at Arthur's side, proud and silent. Guinevere walked down the aisle with grace that felt otherworldly. When Arthur took her hands, he felt peace settle into him. And Guinevere, looking into his eyes, felt a certainty she could not fully explain. They were married beneath a canopy of blossoms, petals falling like soft blessings from the sky. For a time, Camelot flourished in a way it never had before. Guinevere's presence softened the edges of the kingdom. Where Arthur brought justice, she brought understanding. Where Arthur brought unity, she brought compassion. Where Arthur brought vision, she brought heart. Together, they were balance. Together, they were harmony. Together, they were the ideal Camelot dreamed of. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. Guinevere, who had always spoken with perfect composure, felt breathless. Neither spoke of it, neither wanted it, neither understood it, but destiny had woven a thread between them, a thread thin and dangerous. In the weeks that followed, Lancelot served the queen with unerring loyalty. He protected her, escorted her, assisted her. Guinevere admired his kindness, his humility, his quiet strength. Lancelot admired her compassion, her wisdom, her grace. They saw the best in each other, and yet they knew the boundary. They respected the boundary, but the tension grew, quiet, unspoken, heavy. Arthur noticed none of it. He trusted Lancelot completely. He trusted Guinevere completely. He loved them both with a purity that left him blind to the undercurrent forming between them. To Arthur, Lancelot was the ideal knight. To Arthur, Guinevere was the ideal queen, and together they were the perfect reflection of the kingdom he dreamed of. But a heart is not stone. A heart is not logic. A heart is not rule. It is soft. It is human. It is vulnerable. And sometimes, even the gentlest hearts can break under the weight of destiny. Lancelot avoided Guinevere when he could. Guinevere avoided Lancelot when she must. They spoke with formal politeness. They moved with careful restraint. But the truth lingered between them like a quiet ache. One evening, beneath the moonlit arches of Camelot's garden, they found themselves alone by accident. Guinevere stood beside a fountain, lost in thought. Lancelot approached silently, unaware she was there. When she turned, they froze. The night held its breath. "I did not expect to see you," Guinevere whispered. "Nor I you," Lancelot said softly. Silence settled, heavy, fragile, unavoidable. "You have been distant," she said. "I must be," he replied, "for your sake." Guinevere lowered her gaze. "And for yours?" Lancelot's voice broke. "Yes." They stood beside the fountain, listening to the water's quiet song. No words could mend the feelings forming in their chests, and yet they did not confess them. They did not act upon them. They did not betray Arthur. Instead, they made a silent vow, a vow to carry the burden alone, a vow to protect Arthur's heart, even as their own ached. But love unspoken, restrained, denied does not fade. It grows in the shadows. It deepens in silence, and it waits for its moment. Camelot continued to shine. Its walls rose higher. Its festivals grew brighter. Its people prospered under Arthur and Guinevere's balanced reign. Yet beneath the surface, the tension between Lancelot and Guinevere simmered quietly. Not in scandal, not in sin, but in longing, in unfulfilled possibility, in the heart's quiet rebellion against destiny. To the world, Guinevere was the queen who made Camelot beautiful. To history, she would become the queen whose love helped break it. But in truth, she was simply a woman trying to balance duty and desire, love and loyalty, heart and crown. Her presence transformed Camelot. But her presence unintentionally, painfully also planted the first seeds of its downfall. And Arthur, radiant in his trust and hope, walked into the future unaware of the storm forming beneath the gentle surface of his perfect kingdom. Camelot had never been brighter. Camelot had never been more vulnerable. And this chapter ends with a single truth. The heart that makes a kingdom beautiful can also be the heart that breaks it. Camelot glowed brighter with each passing season. The great hall pulsed with life. The round table thrived with unity. Knights left on quests. Scholars composed new teachings. Children played freely in courtyards once marked by war. Arthur's dream seemed unshakable. It shimmered across the kingdom like sunlight on still water. But beneath the calm surface of Camelot, a quiet crack had begun to form. Not in the walls, not in the foundations, but in the hearts of two people who never wished for such a fate. Lancelot, Guinevere. They stood at the edges of a love neither sought, neither welcomed, neither dared to name. Yet destiny had woven their hearts together with threads too delicate, too dangerous to unravel, and slowly, painfully, they began to feel the weight of a love that could never be spoken. Lancelot tried to distance himself. He trained relentlessly. He took night patrols others avoided. He volunteered for the longest quests. He rode into distant forests, through bitter winters, across lonely plains. He crossed rivers swollen with autumn rains. He fought bandits hiding in the hills. He rescued travelers lost in snowstorms. He protected villages from wolves. He gave himself to Camelot completely. But no matter where he went, Guinevere's memory followed. The sound of her voice, the warmth in her eyes, the quiet grace of her presence, her laughter echoing in the great hall, her sadness hidden behind a queen's composure, and always, always the knowledge that she belonged to Arthur. Arthur, whom he loved as a brother. Arthur, whom he admired as a king. Arthur, who had given him a home when he had none. Lancelot's heart twisted with every memory. Guinevere struggled in her own silence. She fulfilled her duties flawlessly. She tended the sick. She counseled the young knights. She supported Arthur in matters of diplomacy. She understood the burdens he carried and eased them with quiet wisdom. But when she walked the gardens in the evening light, her thoughts drifted to Lancelot, to his gentleness, to the way he bowed his head when he spoke to her, to the way he looked away too quickly, as though afraid his eyes might betray him, to the way her own heart quickened when she saw him from across the courtyard. Guinevere felt guilty. She felt torn. She felt ashamed. And yet, beneath all the conflict, she felt alive. She felt seen. She felt understood in a way she struggled to explain. Her love for Arthur was real, deep, steady, but her connection with Lancelot was something else entirely. Something neither pure nor impure, something tender, painful, and inevitable. Arthur, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. He trusted completely. He loved fully. He believed in the goodness of those around him. He believed in Guinevere. He believed in Lancelot, his two most cherished companions, his heart and his sword, his queen and his greatest knight. He did not sense the quiet fracture growing beneath the surface of Camelot. His faith in love was his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. It was Merlin who sensed the shift first. The wizard watched Lancelot from the shadows of the courtyard. He watched Guinevere from the upper balconies. He saw the subtle tension in their body language. He saw the silence between them, silence thick and trembling. Merlin's expression was somber. He felt the future bending uneasily. He knew that destiny, once gentle, was beginning to sharpen its edges. One evening, he approached Arthur as the king studied scrolls in the great hall. "Your kingdom thrives," Merlin said softly. Arthur smiled. "Yes, because of the people who stand with me." Merlin hesitated. "Even the strongest bonds can break," he murmured. Arthur looked up, confused. Merlin did not elaborate. He never did when his heart carried sorrow. Meanwhile, Lancelot grew more distant with each passing month. He trained alone in the pre-dawn hours. He slept little. He ate in silence. He avoided the great hall except when duty required it. The knights noticed but said nothing. Some assumed he was burdened by battles. Others thought he was fatigued by quests. But none understood the storm in his heart. One day, after sparring with a young knight, Lancelot collapsed to his knees. Not from injury, not from exhaustion, but from anguish. He felt his heart tearing, the weight of his unspoken love crushing him. He whispered to the empty yard, "I cannot do this." But the wind offered no comfort. Guinevere, too, found herself unraveling. She avoided the courtyard when Lancelot trained. She lingered in the gardens alone. her hands trembling as she touched the petals of blooming roses. She felt her duty pulling her one way and her heart pulling her another. She felt trapped between two forms of love, one noble, one forbidden, one steady, one burning quietly inside her. She prayed for the feelings to fade, but they did not. The breaking point came on a warm summer evening. Camelot was alive with music. Knights celebrated a recent victory. Laughter rang through the hall. Arthur and Guinevere sat side by side, radiant beneath the flickering torchlight. Lancelot stood at a distance, near the entrance, trying to blend into the background, but his eyes drifted to the queen just once, just a moment. Their gazes met, and in that instant, Camelot held its breath. Guinevere's smile faltered. Lancelot's heart clenched. Arthur, unaware, raised his cup in joy, and Merlin closed his eyes in sorrow. Destiny had spoken. The fracture had begun. Lancelot left the hall abruptly. He stepped into the cool night air, breathing deeply, trying to steady himself. Guinevere excused herself moments later. She walked into the palace gardens, her footsteps light but hurried. The moon cast soft silver shadows across the path. The fountain trickled softly. The roses glowed faintly in the night. She found Lancelot there, leaning against a pillar, his head bowed. He did not turn when he sensed her presence. "Why are you here?" he whispered. "I could ask you the same," she replied softly. He closed his eyes. "Guinevere." She stepped closer. "Please," she murmured. "Look at me." He turned, slowly, painfully. Their eyes met. The truth, long restrained, filled the air between them like fragile fire. "Why do you run from me?" she asked. "Because I must," he whispered. "Because if I stay, I will betray everything I love." Guinevere's breath caught. "Do you love me, Lancelot?" He flinched, as though struck. "Love?" he whispered. "Yes. More than I have words for." Guinevere stepped forward. She trembled. Her voice quivered like the edge of a tear. "And do you think I do not feel the same?" Lancelot's heart shattered. He turned away, pressing a hand against the stone wall. "We cannot," he said. "I know," she whispered. And yet, the pain in her voice cracked something inside him. For a moment, they stood inches apart, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same trembling air. A moment so fragile that even the moon seemed to dim out of respect. Then, Guinevere stepped back. Tears glistened in her eyes. "We must be stronger than this," she said. "Yes," Lancelot whispered. "For Arthur, for Camelot," she added. "For ourselves," he finished. They parted without another word. But something inside them had changed. The unspoken love was no longer hidden. It lived between them, quiet and aching, shaping every future moment. Lancelot tried again to distance himself. He requested leave for a long quest far from Camelot, far from Guinevere, far from temptation. Arthur granted it without hesitation, embracing Lancelot warmly before he departed. "Return soon," Arthur said. "The kingdom needs you." Lancelot swallowed hard. "The kingdom has you, sire," he replied. Arthur smiled. "And you have my trust." Those words cut deeper than any blade. Lancelot rode away from Camelot under a sky of heavy clouds. The wind whipped violently. Rain threatened at the horizon. He did not look back. If he had, his resolve might have broken. He rode for days, nights, weeks. He fought monsters of the land and monsters of his own heart. He saved strangers, he bled, he endured, but no matter how far he traveled, Guinevere's presence lingered. He felt her in the silence between breaths. He saw her in the reflection of still waters. He heard her voice in the rustling leaves. He could not escape. Because love does not live in places. It lives in the soul. In Camelot, Guinevere performed her royal duties with perfect grace, but her heart ached each time she looked at Arthur and saw only goodness, saw only trust, saw only love unbroken. She felt unworthy of that love. She felt trapped by the truth inside her. She feared the moment Arthur might see what she tried so desperately to hide. She feared hurting the man who had done nothing but cherish her. Yet she feared losing Lancelot even more. One night, overwhelmed, she sought Merlin. She found him in the tower, studying ancient scrolls by candlelight. "Master Merlin," she whispered, "tell me how to stop what I feel." Merlin lifted his gaze slowly, softly, with great sorrow. "Your heart," he murmured, "is not a door you can lock." Guinevere trembled. "Then what should I do?" "Be cautious," Merlin said, "but do not punish yourself for being human." Guinevere wiped a tear. "Will this destroy Camelot?" Merlin closed his eyes. "It may," he whispered, "but only if the truth becomes action." For months, Camelot lived in uneasy balance. Arthur felt nothing but joy when Lancelot returned from his quest. He greeted him with an embrace, proud and relieved. "We missed you," Arthur said. Lancelot smiled weakly. "And I missed this place," he replied. His eyes found Guinevere across the hall. Her breath caught. They looked away quickly. The fracture was widening. Rumors began to whisper in the dark corners of the kingdom. Not about scandal, not yet, but about tension, about glances too long, about Lancelot's sudden departures. Whispers are dangerous. They grow roots, they grow wings, they grow teeth. Arthur sensed something shifting, but he misread it. He assumed Lancelot was troubled by war. He assumed Guinevere was exhausted by duty. He assumed the world's burdens were simply heavy. He did not suspect the truth. Arthur trusted too deeply, and that trust was both a blessing and a curse. The final spark that deepened the fracture came unexpectedly. Camelot faced an external threat, an uprising from a northern warlord who sought to tarnish Arthur's rule. Lancelot fought valiantly and returned wounded. Guinevere tended to him through the night with trembling hands. As she bound his wounds, their eyes met again, not with desire, not with recklessness, but with sorrow, with longing, with the silent understanding that they could never be free of each other. Lancelot whispered, "I wish I could love you without hurting him." Guinevere whispered back, "And I wish my heart did not choose what it should not have." Neither touched, neither leaned closer. But the truth between them deepened, and the fracture beneath Camelot deepened with it. This chapter ends not with betrayal, not with scandal, not with collapse, but with a kingdom suspended in quiet tension. A king unaware of the storm at his doorstep, a queen torn between love and loyalty, a night broken by honor and desire, and a dream Camelot, still shining beautifully, but trembling at its edges. The price of love was beginning to reveal itself, and the cost would be greater than any sword could pay. Camelot, in those years, stood at the height of its glory. The round table shone with purpose. Arthur's reign brought peace unseen for generations. The fields were green, the rivers clear, the hearts of the people full of hope. But beneath the gold and the harmony, the fracture born from Lancelot and Guinevere's forbidden love deepened quietly. A fracture delicate as glass. A fracture destiny had been waiting to widen. And destiny, as it often does, chose its moment with painful precision. It chose Mordred. Before he was a man, before he carried the name that history would shudder at, Mordred was a whispered prophecy, a shadow on the edges of Merlin's visions, a stain of darkness on the bright tapestry of Camelot's future, a warning that no magic could erase. Merlin saw him long before Arthur did. He saw glimpses fragmented, shifting images in the fog of fate. A child born in secrecy, a boy raised in bitterness, a young man with Arthur's eyes, and a hatred deep enough to swallow kingdoms. Merlin feared this vision more than any war, any monster, any threat that had come before. For the greatest danger to a kingdom often comes not from outside, but from within. Mordred's story began in a moment Arthur wished he could forget. Before Camelot rose, before the Round Table was shaped, before Guinevere, before Lancelot, before hope had a name, it happened in the years when Arthur was still young, still learning what it meant to bear a crown, still vulnerable to the manipulations of fate. In those early days, Morgan Le Fay walked the edges of Camelot, Arthur's half-sister, gifted, brilliant, wounded. She carried resentment like a cloak, woven from childhood scars and half-remembered injustices. She saw Arthur rise where she believed she should have stood. She saw a kingdom love him effortlessly while she felt unseen, and in her envy, her magic grew sharp. Morgan's heart was not wholly dark, but it was fragile, twisted by pride, and destiny needed only the slightest push. She lured Arthur one night with illusions crafted from moonlight and longing. He was young, conflicted, burdened, and in a moment of confusion, Arthur was deceived. When he learned the truth, horror filled him. Morgan vanished soon after, but the consequence remained. A child, born in secret, raised in resentment, named Mordred. He grew in a distant corner of the realm, under the care of a foster family loyal to Morgan. He heard stories of Arthur not as a noble king, not as a just ruler, not as a symbol of unity, but as a thief, a usurper, a man who had stolen the throne, a man who had cast aside his blood, a man who had abandoned his own son. Mordred's heart hardened early. He trained with a single purpose to one day claim what he believed rightfully his, and with each passing year, he felt the fire of resentment burn stronger. He watched Camelot from a distance. He listened to travelers speak of Arthur's fairness. He heard bards sing of Arthur's glory, and every tale felt like a blade to his chest. "How can the world love him?" he whispered often. "How can they praise the man who cast me into shadows?" His anger festered quietly, silently, patiently, like a storm waiting for the right sky. He came of age in the season when Lancelot's and Guinevere's unspoken love burned most painfully, when Camelot's inner foundation wavered beneath the weight of loyalty compromised by longing, and destiny chose that moment for Mordred to step forward. He arrived at Camelot's gates with a small escort, nothing grand, nothing suspicious, just a young knight seeking service at the Round Table. Arthur received him warmly, as he did every knight who walked into Camelot with hope in his eyes. "You are welcome here," Arthur said with a gentle smile. Mordred bowed deeply. "My king," he murmured, forcing the words through clenched teeth. The first time Arthur saw Mordred clearly, something in him paused. A flicker, a strange familiarity, a feeling he could not name. Eyes. His mother had once told him, blood recognizes blood. But Arthur dismissed the feeling as imagination. He had no reason to suspect the truth. He had no reason to look for his past in the face of this young man. Mordred hid his hatred well. He wore manners like a mask. He spoke with practiced humility. He trained with controlled precision. He smiled when expected. And every day, he watched Arthur, measured him, studied him, examined his weaknesses, and waited. The knights accepted Mordred with cautious curiosity. He was quiet, but capable, disciplined, but emotionally distant, polite, but hard to read. Lancelot was the only one who felt truly uneasy. He often watched Mordred from across the courtyard, sensing something cold beneath the young man's stillness. But Lancelot was drowning in his own turmoil. He said nothing. Arthur valued Mordred quickly. He saw potential. He saw raw talent. He saw loyalty, or the mask of loyalty. And perhaps, On some subconscious level, he saw a bond he couldn't explain. He made Mordred a knight, sooner than expected, and the round table widened to include him. But as Mordred rose, the hidden fracture between Guinevere and Lancelot deepened dangerously. Rumors grew louder, suspicion thrived in the dark corners of the court, and Mordred listened. He listened with a hunger sharpened by years of resentment. He learned of the queen's troubled heart. He learned of the knight who loved her. He learned of Arthur's trust so complete it bordered on blindness. And inside Mordred, a plan began to take shape, not through brute force, not through war, but through betrayal, through truth used like a blade. One evening, Mordred watched Lancelot and Guinevere speak in the garden, nothing improper, just a moment too soft, too lingering. He felt a smile curl at the edge of his mouth. Weakness, Camelot's shining weakness. He could break the kingdom not by attacking its walls, but by cracking its heart. But destiny, weaving its cruel tapestry, did not rely solely on Mordred's ambition. It relied on circumstance, on the fragile balance of three hearts, on love that was pure but impossible, on trust that was deep but unguarded. The breaking point came one night after a feast marking a great victory against invading forces. The hall was full of music and laughter. Arthur sat beside Guinevere, radiant in pride and joy. Lancelot stood at a distance, trying to quiet the ache in his heart. Mordred watched all three. He waited, he listened, and when the moment came, he struck not with a sword, but with truth. He approached Arthur with a bow. "My king, may I speak privately?" Arthur, warm with wine and celebration, nodded and followed him to a quieter corner of the hall. "What troubles you, Mordred?" Arthur asked gently. Mordred lowered his gaze. "I fear something threatens Camelot from within," he whispered. Arthur's smile faded. "Go on." Mordred hesitated, performing the hesitation, crafting the moment. "I fear," he said softly, "that the queen's heart is troubled, and that Lancelot's presence troubles it further." The words landed like frost on warm stone. Arthur blinked, confusion, then disbelief, then something like pain. "No," he murmured, "you must be mistaken." Mordred lowered his eyes in rehearsed sorrow. "I wish I were." Arthur stood there for a long moment. His heart was gentle, soft, open, and it broke easily. But Arthur did not act rashly. He was too compassionate for that, too wise, too patient. He watched, quietly, painfully, and slowly. He saw what he had never looked for. The glances too long, the tension too thick, the silence too heavy. He understood. Camelot trembled. Lancelot felt the shift almost instantly. He sensed Arthur's absence of warmth. He sensed Guinevere's growing sorrow. He sensed the court's whispering shadow. He sensed the storm coming. And he knew this time he could not run from it. The collapse began with a single candlelit moment. A confrontation too painful for either man. Arthur summoned Lancelot privately. The great hall was dark. Only the round table glowed faintly behind them. Arthur's voice was quiet, trembling. "Tell me the truth," he whispered. Lancelot's breath broke. "Arthur, my king." Arthur's eyes glistened. "Do you love her?" Silence. The kind that crushes. The kind that answers without words. Lancelot bowed his head. "In a way I never wanted," he whispered. Arthur closed his eyes. A tear slipped free. He did not shout. He did not blame. He did not strike. He only whispered brokenly, "Why did fate choose this for us?" The next day, Camelot woke to its darkest dawn. Rumors exploded. Mordred fanned them with quiet conversations in shadowed halls. Nobles whispered. Knights questioned. Trust dissolved. The round table, once perfect in its unity, fractured like glass struck by a silent hammer. Arthur, wounded but still gentle, tried to maintain peace. But fate had already tipped the scales. Mordred seized the moment. He rallied those who questioned Arthur's softness, those who feared Camelot's growing ideals, those who envied Lancelot, those who doubted Guinevere. He whispered poison into the ears of the discontent, and the discontent grew. One evening, while Arthur was away negotiating a treaty, Mordred staged a coup. He took the throne. He declared Arthur unfit. He condemned Guinevere. He branded Lancelot a traitor. Camelot erupted in chaos. When Arthur returned, grief stormed through him like winter winds. He faced Mordred in the great hall, the round table between them. "You would destroy what we built?" Arthur whispered. Mordred's eyes blazed. "I will claim what should have been mine." Arthur shook his head. "I would have loved you," he said softly. "I would have welcomed you." Mordred's voice cracked. "I did not want your love. I wanted your crown." And the war began. Arthur left Camelot with loyal knights at his side. Lancelot, consumed with guilt, left too exiled by his own shame. Guinevere was taken to a convent, her heart heavy with the weight of consequences she never intended. Camelot, once radiant, dimmed under Mordred's rule. The final battle took place on the plains of Camelot. Fog hugged the earth. Wind howled softly. Arthur stood at the head of his loyal forces, tired, grieving, older in spirit than in years. Mordred stood opposite him, furious, bitter, blazing with resentment. Their knights clashed like thunder. Steel met steel. Blood soaked the fields. Destiny walked among them silently. Arthur cut through Mordred's shield wall. Mordred pushed forward with reckless fury. The two met at last at the heart of the battlefield. Father and son, king and usurper, hope and ruin. They clashed, once, twice, a third time. Arthur struck Mordred down, but Mordred, with a final burst of hatred, thrust his blade into Arthur's side. The king fell. The dream fell with him. Camelot's golden age ended that morning beneath a grey sky. Loyal knights carried Arthur toward the river's edge, where the Lady of the Lake waited silently. Guinevere would mourn in a distant abbey. Lancelot would wander the wilderness in penitence. Merlin would vanish, grieving the loss of his greatest hope. And Camelot would fade into legend, a dream too fragile for the world, a light too bright to last. As Arthur was carried to the waiting boat, he whispered weakly, I tried to build a world of kindness." And the wind, gentle as a lullaby, seemed to reply, "You did." Arthur closed his eyes, and the kingdom closed its story. Camelot did not die in battle. It died in the quiet cracks of the heart. But its dream, its impossible, beautiful, fragile dream lived on. In stories, in hope, in every place where kindness is chosen over strength, in every moment where unity is valued over pride, in every circle where people sit as equals, Camelot survives, because dreams, unlike kingdoms, cannot truly fall. In the soft quiet after Arthur's fall at Camelot, the wind seemed to change. It carried sorrow, it carried memory, it carried a silence that felt older than the battlefield below. Camelot, once bright as dawn, now existed only in echoes. Lancelot wandered the wilderness. Guinevere retreated to prayer and penitence. Merlin vanished like a dream fading at sunrise. The round table was shattered. The golden age was gone. And yet this was not the end. Because legends do not end, they transform. They shift from life into myth, from history into story, from one generation to the next. They live not in stone, but in hearts. And Arthur's story, more than any other tale in the long memory of humankind, refused to fade. The world may forget kings, it may forget empires, it may forget battles, but it cannot forget Arthur. Not truly, not completely. For Arthur did not simply rule a kingdom, he embodied an idea, and ideas, unlike mortal lives, are immortal. So let us walk slowly now, through the quiet aftermath of the tale. Let us breathe with the rhythm of reflection. Let us look gently at the legacy Arthur left behind. And let us understand softly, deeply, why this story has survived 15 centuries. Arthur's body was carried to the riverbank, where mist curled like silver thread. The Lady of the Lake waited, her presence both sorrowful and serene. The king was placed upon a narrow boat. Lanterns glowed at its bow. His sword Excalibur was returned to the waters that had once delivered it, and the boat drifted away, gliding toward a place beyond mortal knowledge. Some say Avalon, some say a world of healing, some say a realm where kings sleep until they are needed again. This moment, the king departing in silence, became the seed of one of the most powerful legacies in all mythology. The once and future king. Not a king who dies, but a king who waits. A king who returns when the world calls for him. A king whose story never concludes. Why does this matter? Because human beings need hope. Because every age, dark or golden, longs for the return of someone who can restore balance. Because there is comfort in believing that goodness sleeps lightly, ready to rise again. Arthur's story endures because it is not just a story. It is a promise. A promise that leadership can be compassionate. A promise that unity is possible. A promise that justice, though fragile, is worth fighting for. A promise that even fallen kingdoms can live again in the hearts of those who remember them. Camelot was not merely a city, it was an idea of what humanity could achieve at its best. A circle of equals, a place where bravery served justice, where strength protected the weak, where the heart guided the sword, where a king led not from above, but from beside. For 1500 years, people have returned to this dream because they recognize themselves in it, not in the armor, not in the battles, not in the magic, but in the longing, the yearning for a world built on kindness instead of cruelty, on understanding instead of division, on courage instead of fear. Arthur's legacy endures because it speaks to the softest, strongest part of the human spirit. And what of the tragedy? What of Guinevere and Lancelot, whose love fractured the kingdom? What of Mordred, the son twisted by fate? What of the knights who fell? What of the round table broken? These, too, are part of the legacy. For the fall of Camelot teaches a truth even more profound than its rise. Greatness is fragile. Goodness is complex. Love is powerful and dangerous. And human hearts, no matter how noble, are vulnerable. Camelot did not fall because the dream was flawed. Camelot fell because humans are flawed. And in that truth lies a reflection we still see today. A reminder that the pursuit of an ideal requires patience, humility, and forgiveness. Arthur's fate resonates because it is tragically human. He loved deeply. He trusted completely. He forgave easily. He hoped endlessly, and he suffered for all of it. But that suffering does not overshadow his greatness, it elevates it. It makes him real, it makes him relatable, it makes him timeless. For what are we, if not creatures of hope? What are we, if not hearts trying again and again to build something better than what came before? Arthur's story resonates because it captures both sides of the human condition. The dream and the downfall, the light and the shadow, the triumph and the tragedy, and through it all, the persistence of hope. People kept the story alive in monasteries and mead halls. Traveling bards carried it from village to village. Poets wove new layers into it. Kings invoked Arthur's name to legitimize their rule. Artists painted him. Scholars debated him. Generations passed him like a torch between ages. Even when history shifted and languages changed, the story adapted, It grew, it evolved, it traveled from Britain to France, to Germany, to every corner of Europe. It sailed across oceans and settled into new continents. It entered books, theaters, films, and countless imaginations. Why? Because the story was never just about the past. It was always about the future. It has endured because humanity needs reminders of what we can be at our best. Consider the Round Table. A simple piece of furniture, yet a revolutionary concept. No head, no hierarchy. A circle of equals, each voice heard. Modern societies still seek this ideal. Democracies echo it. Councils mirror it. Families, teams, and communities aspire to it. The Round Table is not a relic, it is a blueprint. Consider Excalibur, not a sword of conquest, but a sword of responsibility. Arthur wielded it not to dominate, but to protect. It symbolized the weight of leadership, a reminder that power must serve, not command. Every leader today still wrestles with this balance. And Arthur's example endures as a compass. Consider Lancelot and Guinevere. Their story is not merely a scandal. It is the painful truth that love is not always aligned with duty. That even noble hearts can break. That humanity is imperfect. Their tragedy is timeless because it mirrors the complexities we all face, choices between loyalty and longing, between what is right and what feels right. And consider Mordred, a symbol of what happens when wounds are left to fester, a reminder that bitterness born of neglect can destroy even the best of dreams. His story echoes in every generation that grapples with fracture, resentment, and the consequences of unaddressed pain. But above all, consider Arthur himself. He was not perfect. He was not invincible. He was not without flaws. And that is exactly why he endures. He made mistakes. He trusted too much. He loved too deeply. He believed too strongly. He suffered because of his goodness, but he never abandoned it. Arthur represents the kind of person we hope to be. Compassionate, humble, brave, wise, selfless, human. His dream Camelot was shattered. But the beauty of dreams is that they do not die when broken. They scatter like seeds. They root in the hearts of those who hear them. They grow again in new places, new times, new people. Camelot lives today in every act of kindness, in every moment of understanding, in every fight for justice, in every circle of equals, in every leader who chooses humility over pride, in every person who believes that the world can be better. That is why the story has survived 1500 years. Because the world still needs Arthur. Because the world still needs Camelot. Because the world still needs hope. Not naive hope. Not blind hope. But the quiet, enduring hope that goodness matters. That unity is possible. That love, despite its dangers, is worth carrying. That leadership founded on compassion can exist. And that one day, when the world calls for him, Arthur will rise again. For history ends, kingdoms fall, empires crumble, but legends wait, legends breathe, legends whisper in the wind, and in the softest moments, when night is quiet and stars shine like old memories, you can still feel the truth of the final promise. Arthur is the once and future king, sleeping, not gone, waiting, not lost, returning, not forgotten. And that softly, gently, beautifully is why his story has endured for 1500 years. Not because he lived, but because he will live again whenever humanity needs the reminder of what we can be. Camelot may have fallen, but the dream remains. And as long as the dream remains, Arthur remains. In my telling, in your listening, in every heart that chooses hope over despair, in every light that glows against the dark. This story exists because we still believe in the impossible, and the impossible, like Arthur, never truly dies.